Press that live. Going live.
All right. It says we are live. So we already got a few people in the chat. Hello there, everyone. Welcome. This is On Just Restart. We do this podcast every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time or 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Here we have Rob from Rule of Two Review. He has returned again. And welcome, buddy.
Yo, yeah, thanks for having me on again, buddy. I appreciate coming on the podcast. One of my favorite podcasts. Thanks for having me back. We'll find some stuff to talk about, even if it feels like it's not very news heavy this week.
Yeah, it's not a news heavy week. And it's interesting because, like, for those who don't know, this is a Nintendo podcast. We talk about Nintendo things, but
yes, we do.
And I try to try to be consistent, do it every week. And it's easier when there's obvious news to talk about, but when there's not news on a channel that's sort of focused on sort of speculating on the news, I'm not saying it gets worse. It's just kind of more like we have to start digging deeper. And I feel like sometimes when we just start to like look back at what we have and start to speculate and theorize, we might like find more interesting things, you know? So it might be an opportunity to kind of, I think today's discussion might be fun. Rob, I can't hear you. I don't know if I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I had a little bit of lagging on your end.
Oh.
It kind of went in and out.
Oh,
I wasn't
okay.
saying anything, but...
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I'm good. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But yeah, guys, the plan for tonight, we're going to be talking a little bit about Bowser's Fury. We got some information about that this week. But then we're going to be jumping into a whole bunch of theories for both Breath of the Wild 2 and Metroid Prime 4. Rob has his own theories. I has my own. We're going to be sort of bouncing off of each other. I mean, I saw you had a recent discussion on Game Explained. You had a few videos about both Metroid and Zelda this week. And I saw all of them. I thought they were all fantastic, by the way. So, guys, you definitely check them out. His channel is linked in the description below. He actually also just hit 15,000 subscribers.
Yeah, dude, finally. Man, it's been a weird road for me because in 2020, my channel was doing really, really well for just like the typical growth that I have. And then the last couple of months, it's like, I mean, it's YouTube, man. Like weird things with the algorithms and the recommendations, and you never know. And, you know, you'll hit that period where maybe you do go crazy for a couple of weeks or a couple months, and then you'll hit that part where you kind of wane a little bit and you go slow.
Yeah.
And I just hit that wall. Like in November. And I was definitely on pace to cross 15K before the end of 2020. They ended up not happening until, just yesterday. But that's cool. So now, I finally did it.
You hit it.
I hit 15K. So that feels pretty good, man. Yeah.
But now you're going to go to 16K. So, guys, if you haven't subscribed to Rob yet, make sure to subscribe to his channel. Watch his content. If you like what I do, you're going to love what he does. So, watch his stuff. Leave likes. Subscribe. It's going to be a good time.
All that good stuff. And I do want to say, because Andres, you, my man, are really not that far off from 10K. You're going to get there quick, dude. You are. If there's one thing I appreciate that I see that's happening, that's a good thing in the YouTube gaming space right now, is that your channel is blowing up and doing so well right now. At least from my perspective, I don't know if you agree with your channel's performance, but you're killing it lately. And it's like, it's a good channel. I mean, I've said so many times, you're one of my favorite channels, one of my good buddies. I just love what you've been doing since I discovered you around, I think, 4K or so. And you're just killing it, man. I just love to see it. You make amazing content. I hope you hit 10K super soon and just keep going. Honestly, at this pace, you'll pass me in like a year probably. So I just hope you just keep skyrocketing, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Like, for sure. Like, I want to, the more people we get in here, like, that's more people that see this and more people in the chat, right? More interaction there. And obviously, I really like doing this. So, the bigger the channel gets, the more I can do this. The more time I can devote to making videos and making better content. So I really appreciate that you guys like this stuff. And Rob, thanks for noticing. But I'll tell you, though, because, like, the YouTube space, it is strange, right? Like as you noted, from your perspective, things seem great. And I'm not saying they haven't been good. I'm glad that, things have been going well, but it is an up and down thing, right? Like, so... Last week, I was like, every video I put out was like, did pretty well. People seem to like it. It's like, what, this week, I'm going to try even harder. And then it's like, even though I put in more work, it seemed, it like, the numbers took a little bit of a dive. Not like, they're not bad, but it's like, it's an up and down thing.
By comparison to what you were doing, right? You feel like they were down a little. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's YouTube, man.
Yeah. But if I were to compare what I'm doing right now, even when it's like a down period to like maybe 6 months ago, I'd be like, oh my god, what's going on? This is amazing, right? Like, so it's all it's all relative, right? So it
is for sure relative, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a weird competitive space, but yeah, it's been fun. But let's see what everyone in the chat is saying. Let's catch up with people in the chat, and then we'll jump into things here. Let's see. Hello there, Dominique. Hey, Andres, how are you holding up on these difficult times? By the way, I really want to tell you that you deserve more than 1 million subscribers. Can't wait for the awesome podcast. Well, thank you.
There you go.
1 million would be pretty cool. That's a big number. We'll see what happens. Yeah. Thomas Owen, Metroid Prime 4. Let's go. Yeah.
Let's go.
Rob, I'm just kind of curious on your take here. Because you were with Joey and Dave on the Game Explain podcast, but Joey's been doing a great job. Joey, I don't know if you'll see this, but you are doing a great job, just so you know. Yes. He's put out a few Metroid Prime 4 videos this week on Game Explain, and I feel like, I'm pretty sure it's just for fun, like it's the 2-year anniversary of the restart of Prime 4, but people are wondering, why is Joey making all these videos? Does Game Explain know something? I'm going to say probably no, but I'm just kind of curious on your take here. Because, in the past, Game Explain has had a few inside sources and perhaps tipped off to a few things happening. But just what's your take on that?
What's my take on what specifically?
Okay,
on what
right,
Game Explain knows, or just what?
Do you think? Do you think the reason Game Explain is putting out so many Metroid videos this week is because, it just makes sense because of the 2-year anniversary and it's fun to talk about Metroid, or is it because they think a Metroid announcement is coming soon?
Well, I would say if I was a betting man, there's reasons to believe a lot of things, and obviously things have been floating around for a long time on Metroid Prime 4. Some public, some behind the scenes. With Game Explain, I think they're just enjoying the 2-week anniversary thing. And I would also think that because Joey is a new employee over there, a new person over there, also a really good friend of mine. Him and I have been friends for a couple of years too, and I was glad he invited me on the podcast there. He's a big Metroid fan, so he's maybe just kind of keeping it alive a little bit on that channel since that's who he's working for now. So I would say that's probably for the most part why that stuff is happening right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I just kind of wanted to address it just because I know people are talking about it and people are thinking, what if this is this? And it doesn't mean there won't be Metroid stuff happening in the near future, right? Like it doesn't mean no. It just it's a matter of who knows what, right? It's like who knows what and who's sharing what at what time, right? Yeah,
that's kind of the question.
Yeah, and I'll also say this: I am not okay. First of all, no one's told me anything, right? And I'm not trying to say that I believe this is happening like really soon, like next week soon. But I am a believer in the whole concept of a calm before the storm. Last 2 weeks have been a little slow in terms of news. I'm not saying that we're going to for sure get like an Nintendo Direct announcement next week or something, but I'm just saying, eventually we're going to start getting news again. Like,
Sure.
Maybe.
I mean, at some point, you're right. Like, at some point, floodgates obviously open. No matter what company you're talking about. Obviously, here we're talking about Nintendo. And Nintendo is the company that's the most weird when it comes to how they do their news. And it's also like, it's just the company that is more interesting and fun to follow when it comes to how they do their news. So, we're so good as fans of Nintendo about following the patterns and trying to predict the patterns and see the future. And part of that is because they created this very specific news cycle with the Nintendo Direct just when they introduced it. Like, there was a time before Nintendo Directs and it was a different situation, but Directs came along, and over the course of 10 years, I mean, as of this year, it's 10 years, like they've become so part of their news cycle, and they're a company that gives these messages in this way. So it slowly created over that 10 years an expectation for fans about how and when Nintendo does stuff. But of course, everything kind of got thrown to the wayside last year, and so how does the change last year affect this year? And so, but I will say, you talk about the calm before the storm thing, and I don't think that's crazy. There's a really good chance that that's what we're seeing. And I've stated many times, I'm not going to talk specifically about Metroid Prime 4, but when I talk about maybe a Nintendo Direct, I've stated the last couple of weeks, I think we're going to get one this year. But a lot of people think that they're dead and gone forever. Actually, I mean, and I haven't watched your newest video on this. I know your title, so I assume that you think that they're also coming back. But I am kind of curious to maybe have you elaborate a little bit, on what you think, because I think they're coming.
Yeah, so we'll still get to the chat, just for the record, guys. But whenever Rob and I are on, it's just the discussion just keeps going. It just keeps happening.
Yeah.
But so. Yeah, I mean, I do think that they are a thing, and to be clear, because I actually had made a video a week before that video, kind of theorizing when we're getting the next Direct, or rather, me saying my theory is that we're going to get a February Direct of some kind. Not necessarily a General Direct, not necessarily a Direct Mini, not necessarily a Zelda Anniversary Direct, but maybe one of those three or something along those lines. Something that I think will appeal to the larger part of the Nintendo fan base. So in other words, not necessarily a partner showcase and not just a Pokemon Direct, which I also think is happening, but something else, something that kind of reaches closer to that core Nintendo fan base. That's my theory, and I obviously could be wrong. But what I notice is that a lot of people, and not hate, just, disagreements, arguments, debates, and that's totally fine. I respect that. I want that to happen more. Whenever I make my videos and I try to make points, I love it when it's an intellectual discussion where people have counterpoints or support my point and perhaps add to it, right? So a lot of people sort of brought up in that video that they think directs aren't coming back, and some people even noted directs of any kind. So that kind of got my brain thinking, okay, also some people think that directs of all kind are dead, and then some people just think general directs are dead. And I sort of thought about that throughout the week, and that's what amounts to the video that you just were talking about, where I was saying I don't think directs are dead. So yeah, I don't think any kind of directs are dead. I think if you look throughout 2020, which is the year where, if there's going to be a year where Nintendo doesn't have directs, it's that year because it's the pandemic, right? Everything was thrown off. And we did have a large gap where we got no news. But if you just go back and you look at the direct archive, we still got a direct mini in the early part of the year. That's my cat. He's making noise. Stop touching the bag, buddy.
That's what they do.
Yeah. Don't worry. It's just a cat. So we got the Direct Mini, we had an Animal Crossing Direct, we had a Monster Hunter Direct, we had several partner showcases, we had the 35th Anniversary Mario Direct, which you could argue was about as big as a General Direct, but just focused on Mario. And there was also the Super Nintendo World Direct just a few weeks ago, really, about a month ago in December. So the premise of Directs being dead, no. I mean, the Nintendo still very much believes in the Direct, but the question is, I think the bigger question to ask is, are we getting general Nintendo Directs? Because we haven't seen one since September of 2019, right? That's where people are sort of concerned.
It's insane. It's insane. It's been so long.
Very long period. But I'll argue that, it's not that Nintendo's done. It's just that it's been a weird situation with the whole pandemic. And to use that as evidence to suggest that Nintendo is done, I don't think is the best idea, because it's just kind of a small sample size and it's kind of an aberration in terms of information. So I would wait a little bit longer before I start to think that maybe directs are dead. If we have a full healthy year, let's say by this time next year we still haven't gotten a general direct, then I'll probably be like, yeah, you know what, I think you're right, general directs aren't coming back. Nintendo's doing things differently now.
For sure.
But one more thing I want to point out. We've got a decent amount of announcements and news about things throughout January, but it's mostly just for things we already knew about. We got more information on 3D World, we got more information on Bravely Default 2, more information on Monster Hunter, and more information on Pokemon Snap. And that sort of filled up the beginning months of this year. But if you think about it, we haven't gotten any news about anything else. There's nothing new that's been brought up from Nintendo at all. So to me, that's kind of goes back to the calm before the storm thing. Once Bowser's Fury comes out on February 12th, that's going to pretty much be the end of the major announcements or the major things for Mario's 35th anniversary. and Zelda's anniversary is 9 days after that. Not saying it's gonna happen like literally 9 days afterwards, but I do feel like Nintendo will start to transition into making more announcements to happen beyond February, March, and April, because that's all we pretty much know about at this point. And they're gonna do it more than a month in advance. So February to me seems like a decent bet for something. That was my 10-minute response to your question, but there you go.
That's a good response. Yeah, no, that's good stuff. I mean, a lot of the points that you even make are things that I agree with, or even, reflect some of the points I've made in my own videos about it. Because, as I discussed in one of my videos, how the first quarter, through March looked so strong, and that's great to see. And it's 4 or 5 pretty big games, and like you said, we're already close to when those games are already out, and so what happens after that? And it's just hard to imagine, whether it's a Nintendo Direct or something else that they do, like, it's hard to imagine Nintendo will go the whole first quarter and not address people with some kind of news, right? Which is kind of building off of the point that you're making. Like, what happens after Monster Hunter Rise, which is like the furthest in the future big title that we know is coming to the Switch? They have to pump whatever's coming out in the spring. Nintendo notoriously has a pretty decent sized game in like the April, May, kind of June time. Some of the years of the Switch, they've had a big title in July, and at that point, we're really in the dead middle of summer. But this is the time to let everyone know if there's a big July title, right? Whatever that's going to be. I actually think that mid to late summer is probably when No More Heroes 3 will launch. That's my current target. I think August is which is like a later summer. August is about my target date, but that period for No More Heroes 3. And if that's true, then obviously in February, like you think, or even by the end of March, which is kind of what I think, we'll see a direct or a couple of trailers or some sort of big news opening from Nintendo. Like, hey, here's some stuff. Like, 2021 is going to have games, even if it's slow again. Nintendo can't not tell us about those games. So going back to the whole thing you said about the calm before the storm, it just feels exactly like that. They've got four or five big games. We got to get these games out. Mario's a huge one. And also we've seen situations in the past with Nintendo where when one of their big games comes out, within a week or two, they will sometimes have a direct and actually be like, okay, Animal Crossing came out, now here's a follow-up direct,
Right.
Some other game, I can't think of an example, but something happened before Animal Crossing.
I got dates for you.
Give it to me.
Something
happened the year before.
I don't remember game releases, but I believe the Animal Crossing Direct was it March 20th?
That was late February.
No, yeah, it was February 20th.
Animal Crossing came out on March 20th.
No, you know what? Let's just Nintendo Direct archive. This will take less than 30 seconds.
We have the technology.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I think the Animal Crossing Direct, I want to say, was like late February. Then March 20th it came out, and then the following week in March, I think, was the Direct Mini, right? Does that add up?
February 20th was the Animal Crossing New Horizons Direct, but the game came out in March. The Direct Mini came out March 26th, and Animal Crossing, the day, like I forget. I think you might be right.
I think it's March 20th. Yeah, I think it's March 20th. Which would mean, February 20th to March 20th. So they pulled
right. You're exactly
month.
right. Exactly right. March 20th, and then 6 days later, Direct Mini, which technically was the biggest Direct of the year when you look back in hindsight.
Sure was.
And of course that was because of the pandemic. But point is, you're right. Not even a week later, after a major game release, they transitioned to marketing the next set of big things. Which kind of sort of supports my idea, right? That after 3D World
in February,
it's interesting because it concludes basically all of the major stuff for Mario's 35th anniversary. Like, sure, they're gonna still have some things on the eShop leading towards the end of the fiscal year, but in terms of like actual releases, that's the last one. So they can start transitioning their marketing to other things beyond Mario's 35th anniversary, right? But then Zelda's anniversary is just 9 days away. And 3D World's like their biggest games. That kind of goes back to the whole Animal Crossing to Direct Mini sort of thing. So like there's a few different things that are sort of lining up there, on top of the Pokemon Direct that's probably coming at the end of February.
Yeah, which would be huge for Pokemon fans for sure. But I tell you, man, I think about 3D World comes out, and I don't care if it's a week or 3 weeks or whatever. If they actually do some kind of a Zelda presentation that's in the same vein of that Mario 35th Direct, I mean, oh boy, that's exciting. I love Mario, and I enjoyed that direct, and I even like Mario 3D All Stars. I have no problems with the HD. I don't really care. It's great. I love that it exists.
Yeah, I'm happy
they
to have
do
it on my
something like
Switch.
that for Zelda. Yeah, it's just I get so excited thinking about. I mean, I think Skyward Sword will be coming if that's something that they do. Like, I think they're gonna give us something. I didn't think that at first. You know, everyone said after Mario 3D All Stars, like, oh, they're gonna do the same for Zelda, and I was like, nah, that's too good to be true. That's wishful thinking. But I absolutely changed my own mind as I thought about it for a couple of months after 3D All Stars, and I was like, you know, I actually think they might do it. You know, and I discussed like 2 of those 3D Zelda games have already been made in HD, so why wouldn't they do a collection? Why wouldn't they do Skyward Sword? Like, so it just like my Zelda nerd fanship just gets really excited just thinking if they actually do what we've been wanting them to do, it would be so cool. So I sure hope it happens.
Yeah, so I want to get back to the Zelda stuff, and there's still a whole bunch, but I promise I'll get to the chat. So let me get to the chat, address some of the questions and introductions, and then we'll jump back into things here.
Yes. Apologies.
Yeah. Thomas Owen added me. Nintendo should be paying you for doing a better job of keeping Metroid alive than they are. For now, us content creators might be doing it, but I have a feeling that by the end of this year, you'll be pretty happy with Metroid stuff. Of course, we've said that every year, but I think this is the year. So
this is the year.
Yeah, this is the year. Hello there, Riley Shields. Matteo D. Really love the work you put out on the channel and just keep up the good work. Thank you. Ronnie Fazio, hello there. Benjamin, hello. Paul Dunn. Paul Dunn. I think Pewd should just give all the subs to Andres. I mean, if he wants to do that, that's fine.
Oh, did he say PewDiePie? Is that
yeah,
what he said?
PewDiePie. Yeah. I think PewDiePie makes some pretty funny videos sometimes. I don't watch all of his videos, but occasionally I'm like, you know what, this guy has a knack for comedy.
I was a fan of his older stuff, you know, back when he was first blowing up, like 2013, 2014. I was actually, me and my buddies, we were a fan of PewDiePie, so not as much anymore, but you know.
Yeah, but yeah, he's the biggest YouTuber in the world, definitely. He does some good things. I got some ats here. Birdman, the content is amazing as always. Thank you, Birdman. Ella Schmidt, do you think Nintendo Directs are dead? Well, we kind of just talked about it. Both Rob and I don't think they are dead. We'll probably shed a few more like notes on that throughout the discussion, but no, they're not dead. We just got to be patient. We were going through a pandemic. That impacts things. Shane Himes, could they be waiting until the release of Bowser's Fury to give us a 2020 lineup so as not to take attention away from Bowser's Fury? Also, kind of what we sort of talked about. That's my theory. I think that once that comes out, Nintendo will start transitioning into other things, perhaps slightly before, but around the time that Bowser's Fury comes out and they're done sort of marketing that, they'll move on to other things. I mean, they're going to have to eventually. So, yeah, I think by February we could get at least a couple other really cool announcements, at least. Taker610, you must will the Zelda 35th Direct into existence. You must believe. I'm believing, buddy. I want that Zelda Direct having more than it. Well, there's a lot of avid Zelda fans, so but I'm right. We're up there. Solo Jones, Andre, Rob, considering last year there was a job advert for Metroid Prime 4 with mention of emotional storytelling, does that give alarm bells of an other M-like situation?
Boy, that's a loaded question. That is a loaded question. I have. Go ahead.
No, you go first.
Well, okay, so I understand the question because he says, does it give you alarm bells because of Other M?
Yeah.
So that's tricky for me because I am very open about the fact that I like Other M. In fact, there's a reason that there's an Other M poster in the back of all my videos. Like, I like Other M. I think it's a good game. But the nuance to that answer is, even though I like the game quite a bit, and I even like the story, there are problems with how they executed some of the story. It's not all puppies and rainbows. Like, I think it's a good game that has good gameplay, great graphics. I absolutely love the visuals on the Wii in 2010. That game is beautiful for what that console is. And I liked exploring Samus as a person and a woman. I actually think that was a really good idea, and I don't hate how they did all of it, but there are some things that they did that didn't work out. So if they're trying to tell us that there's gonna be emotional storytelling, as long as it's not as melodramatic as the worst parts of Other M, I'm not super worried about it. Also, because it's a Prime Universe game, and Kensuke Tanabe is involved with this game like he was in the other games, and it's Retro Studios and all these things, there's no reason to think that the overtly Japanese approach that Team Ninja took to the melodramatic storytelling in Other M is going to be in Metroid Prime 4. I do think there's a really good chance that they do step into more of a cinematic and maybe even a voiced kind of story approach to the game. And I'm okay with that. But you can do that without making the mistakes Other M did. So even if we finally see a trailer and let's say it's chock full of like voice acting and Samus taking her helmet off and talking to people who we don't know what they are, all these things that I think a lot of people would freak out about. If we see that, I'm not going to be having alarm bells rung by any means. I mean, it's just going to be about the execution. And as we have time to digest the trailers, I think that there's absolutely a way to tell a story-centric Metroid Prime game, focusing on Samus without making those same, mistakes, which I say as a fan. Again, I like Other M. So yeah, it's a loaded question. It's a good question though. So yeah, I mean, what do you think?
I mean, I feel like you bring up an interesting point because we're talking about like Eastern development versus like Western development, right? Like that inherently does lend itself towards more of a different style. So that alone, I think, is a great point and just sort of kind of dispels the idea in my mind that it's going to be a similar situation. But on top of another point you brought up, it's being made by Retro and Prime producer Kensuke Tanabe. Like that's the formula for Metroid Prime, the Metroid Prime series. So even if they go into more of a vocal sort of narrative focus compared to the other Prime games, that doesn't necessarily lend itself towards the whole Other M thing, which, by the way, I also enjoyed. But I should note that I got Other M for $7 back. Like I found it in a bargain bin, and
bargain bin.
Yeah, my parents had went away for the weekend. I was alone. I was like, oh well, you know what? Other M, $7. I don't care what the internet says. I'm gonna play it. And
parents are out of town. It's time to get busy with some Metroid Other M.
Legit, that entire week, all I did, because I think it was trying to remember when. I think it was a summer. So I was working part-time at a Target. My parents asked me to paint the fence, so all I did was paint the fence and take breaks and play Other M the entire week. So I beat the whole game in that week.
What a weird week.
It was a weird week, but it was a fun week. Other M is actually a pretty good game, gameplay wise. The only problems I have with it are the pointer controls and maybe the story, but like everything else is just gold to me. But I'm not really concerned about the story because Nintendo's being so careful about this. They are hiring some of the best talent in the industry. They have Kensuke Tanabe at the helm. They have Retro Studios, who has never put out a bad game. They may not come out with a lot of games, but I think the reason they don't come out with a lot of games is because they refuse to release something that is not of high quality. So,
for sure,
yeah, I'm not worried. I think they're gonna do a good job, or at least it'll be okay, and everything else about the game will be amazing. So I'm not worried. Yeah.
I mean, it's almost fair to say that one of the reasons we know they won't do that is because they already made the mistake the first time.
Yeah.
And I use the word mistake loosely because myself and you were actually fans of the game. But as far as the overall perception, you could argue it's a mistake for a lot of people. And it's like, well, they already learned a lesson. They understand what people do and don't want from Metroid even more because of Other M. So what are the odds Nintendo allows it to happen a second time? I mean, I just don't see them doing it.
I think part of the reason Nintendo is so careful about like using it's a budgeting thing in terms of like having voiceover work and stuff like that, but also it's a presentation thing. They want to be very careful about their characters, their branding. So when things like Other M happen, I think they are like, well, we don't want to do that again. We don't want to present Metroid in an inappropriate way. And it kind of links back to Nintendo movies, actually, because I believe that initial Super Mario movie that came back, I don't even know when, but a long time ago, and it's
92, I think? 92 or 93, something like that? Yeah.
I liked the movie as a kid because I'm just a Nintendo fanboy, but it is objectively a terrible movie. Yeah. Nintendo learned a lot of lessons from that, and that's why we haven't seen Nintendo movies for so long, because they're like, this ruins our brand. We do not want our characters to be presented in this way, so that's why we haven't seen it. But now Nintendo's going back. But if you've been paying attention to what we have heard about this Mario movie that is maybe gonna come out, Shigeru Miyamoto's working closely with
studios.
Right, but Shigeru Miyamoto's closely working with the project, so Nintendo they're staying really close to this. So whatever happens, Nintendo approves of this. It's gonna feel like a very Nintendo thing. So anyway, my point is that Nintendo has shown that they want to be careful about how their characters are presented. So that's just kind of like another reason to perhaps think that they won't screw up the story too much. Yeah, I agree. But let's continue on with the chat here, and then we'll get into the topics. Let's see here. That was a great question, though. Super Chris. Hello there, Super Chris. Where is Brandon? Brandon's just, spending time with family this weekend. Christopher Mendez added the both of us. Could you provide some discussion on what a partner direct might entail? So I actually not sure that so initially I was thinking we might get a partner direct in January, but I think Nintendo pretty much just dropped trailers instead. A partner direct, to me, in general, I'm not saying one like right now, because I don't think there's a need for one right now, but a partner direct basically is anything that's not internally Nintendo. So there could still be Nintendo associated things. So for example, Age of Calamity, yes, it's using the Zelda franchise, but it's being developed by Koei Tecmo outside of Nintendo. Bravely Default 2, Nintendo's helping to publish that, but Square is developing it. Things like that, even though they're closely associated with Nintendo, because they're not being developed internally by Nintendo, they're being featured in the partner showcase. And that's pretty much what it is. It's a showcase of partners of Nintendo.
Mm-hmm. Well, and don't forget Cadence of Hyrule is even a good example. That showed up in, I think, either the first or the second. It was So that was exactly it was early on. And so just like the examples you're making, like with Hyrule Warriors or something, like that's a Nintendo IP, a Zelda thing, but it's a third-party developed, kind of indie game. So as far as just like the definition, I think, of a partner presentation, like they're asking, it's everything you said. It's just a third-party game releasing on a Nintendo console, Nintendo sees that company as a partner. They're partnered with Moon Studios, for example, for the two Ori games or whatever. That's like how Nintendo views them. So a game like that can be showcased in that one bundle of different trailers, and they can call it a partner presentation. So
so that's pretty much what I think it would entail. I mean, I guess I don't know if maybe we were thinking of in terms of in the future, but I guess if we were to see another partner showcase, whatever is outside of internally Nintendo developed things that's on the horizon would be brought up. Like, for example, maybe more information on No More Heroes 3, or perhaps more footage of Shin Megami Tensei 5. Things like that we could see. Yeah. Or, technically, if the rumors are true, that 2D Metroid that's being supposedly made by Mercury Steam, that I think would qualify as a part. Like, technically, it would. Because
I don't know if that would show up in one of those, though.
I don't see. That's the thing. Like, I agree with you. I don't think it would, but I'm just saying technically I think it could, because it's not like an internal thing by Nintendo. But I mean, I think once we start showing Metroid stuff, it's gonna all kind of come together. But we'll save that for a little bit later.
Yes.
We have a sighting of a Ferris Wheel Pro in the chat. Hello there, Joey. How you doing?
Oh, snip snap, Mr. Ferris. What's up, buddy?
Yeah, just for those who know, Joey is making all the Metroid videos at Game Explain now, so make sure to check them out. They're pretty good.
He's keeping the love alive.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Christopher Mendez. Don't be surprised if Nintendo strategically does an annual direct in summer with regular partner directs. Yeah. And they could just have trailers to sort of support. That's possible for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because that theory almost makes it sound like maybe they would do like one big direct, maybe over what would normally be the E3 time, and then just around it have those smaller directs. So possibly. It'd be interesting to see if the partner presentations come back this year. I think there's a good chance. I'm kind of 50-50 on it,
Yeah, I'll say that I sort of expected one for January. We didn't get one.
Oh, no.
They don't have to happen every month.
I think,
yeah, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't. And I mean, per the theory you and I talked about in the beginning here, I think they're just trying to get through this first quarter. They've got these couple of big games, and then near the end of this quarter, they're going to start dropping the hints and the whatever for the next couple of quarters, the rest of the year. So maybe if they do the post 3D World show, maybe it is just a partner presentation. I mean, we'd rather have a regular direct, but maybe it's just one of those.
And I mean, the biggest reason why is because I want to see some internally Nintendo developed things. We didn't really get any of that throughout 2020, save for Animal Crossing, which was delayed into 2020. Like, I think even Paper Mario is developed by Intelligent Systems. So, I want to see some internally developed Nintendo stuff, and they've been working on stuff. They haven't been just sitting there. There are things. We just
totally.
Yeah.
They can't have a 2021. They can't have any year where they address no one about anything. Like it's just not possible. They're working on like, who knows, a Mario Kart, a new Mario sequel to Odyssey. We know they're making Breath of the Wild 2. We know Metroid Prime 4. Like, they're working closely with Platinum on Bayonetta 3, and who knows what other things we don't know about. Donkey Kong, like you made even a great video about Donkey Kong possibly showing up. Like, they're working on stuff, man. So there's no way that they're gonna not find a way to tell us what it is. But they definitely are really riding it out, man. They are taking their sweet time. So whatever they're doing, they're not gonna tell us till they're ready. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get to a couple more comments, and then we're going to jump into the actual topics. Paul Dunn, would you rather get a Triforce Collection, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword, or would you rather have a Hero of Time Collection, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask? So I'm going to tell you, I would prefer a Triforce Collection of Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and Wind Waker, even though Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are some of my favorite games of all time. So my reasoning for it is 1, 3 is better than 2. But also, I just feel like if we're going to get a collection like that, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, in my opinion, need more work in order to be appropriately modernized. And I know that they won't do that in a collection. They won't.
For sure.
So, but Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess have already been fairly modernized. We have HD remasters for both of them. So it's not even that much work to be done there. And sure, maybe they could still modify a few extra things. So there is still that possibility. And then if we also somehow get a Skyward Sword in that as well, which I think is a lot, by the way, we'll talk about that later. Like, that's also something that wouldn't be as hard for Nintendo to modernize compared to Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. So I would prefer that just because I think it would be a more polished package overall and technically more content.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it's one of the stealing factors for me is the Wind Waker. That's my favorite Zelda game, even over Breath of the Wild. And in this example where Skyward Sword is one of the games, I also adore Skyward Sword, and I want to see that game come to another console and see it in HD. So, I mean, Ocarina and Majora's Mask are incredible, and they're classics. And I mean, I like Ocarina of Time more than I like Twilight Princess for sure, and more than probably I like Skyward Sword. But it's just too exciting to think about a Wind Waker and a Skyward Sword on the Switch. Like, it's just hard for me to say no.
Yeah, well, we haven't gone the Skyward Sword remaster yet.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That game is held hostage on the Nintendo Wii, like it needs a chance to break free. Like, let's do it. Let's go.
It also will probably be similar to Wind Waker in the sense that with minimal graphical enhancements, that game can look a lot better. So, I
think you're right. Yeah. Art style goes a long way, the art direction. Yeah. So I think you're right.
Yeah, like they actually, I think, I mean, it's hard to quantify just from, my eyes, but I feel like Twilight Princess technically had more graphical work done to it, but it didn't seem to take as much of a jump because of the realistic art style. Like, basically, like, pretty much, like, reworked, like, almost all the textures in Twilight Princess to have, like, HD cleaner textures, but the game, it was going for more of a pseudo-realism, or realism for the time, so it just hasn't aged as well, even with those enhancements. Meanwhile, Wind Waker, all the textures are, it's a very clean, toon-like game, so you just, you still clean up the textures, sure, but you put in that nice lighting engine, and all of a sudden everything just pops, and It's this beautiful, colorful experience.
Yeah, it asks a game like that asks less of you to believe the world and the visuals than something like a Twilight Princess that is going for the more realistic look. But I still want to kind of stick up for Twilight Princess a little bit. And I know you're not really dogging it, but I actually think that the HD remaster looks surprisingly good. And I think part of the reason is you mentioned the textures that they redid, which really makes a huge difference. But they also updated some of the lighting in that game, and boy, it makes a difference. So the art style is for sure not as timeless. You're 100%, but I still thought it was pretty impressive for what it was, you know?
Yeah. Like, I mean, and again, yeah, I agree with you. The game's definitely beautiful, but I think you also agree with me that Wind Waker, it just has aged better. But either way, I want to see Twilight Princess. I do have that itch to play through Twilight Princess again. I want to see it in HD. I had it on my Wii U. I don't have it anymore, which maybe I should go get it. Or maybe we're getting the Zelda collection not too long from now. But either way, I think we're eventually going to see all these games come within the next few years. I'm not sure we're going to get all of them this year. I think Nintendo wants to save some for other years because they like to have Zelda content come out pretty much every year. But I do expect at least a couple this year. Maybe, at least one. So, but
okay, well, yeah, we won't go into that.
We'll get to it. I want to catch up with the chat, and then we'll get to it. Let's see here. Novus talks. Twilight Princess 100% coming to Switch. It was released on Nvidia Shield 2 years ago. Mario Galaxy was also released on the Shield. Now it's on Switch. That's a fantastic point. It could be something that Nintendo can easily bring over. For sure. I agree with you that it's probably coming. For me, it's just more of a question of when, not if.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how, right?
Yeah.
Just like the question about the Mario games was how are they going to do it? So.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same way they did 3D All-Stars.
Mm-hmm.
Ronnie Fazio added me. Do you think the Descendants of the Champions will have a role in Breath of the Wild 2? Also, thoughts on Age of Calamity messed up how I say Prince Sidon in Smash. So he would be cool. I don't expect it, but if he has a huge role in Breath of the Wild 2, then maybe. In terms of the Descendant Champions having a role in Breath of the Wild 2, I think that comes down to where Breath of the Wild 2 takes place. And the reason I think it's kind of an interesting question that I'm going to actually kind of hold off for a little bit on is because I actually saw one of your videos recently, Rob, where you were making an interesting point about how Breath of the Wild 2 might not even take place in Hyrule. Now, what's interesting about that is that technically we do have an interview where Adrian has said that we will be returning to Hyrule, but, you know, translation, and he could be saying that loosely, maybe we're only in Hyrule briefly, and we still go somewhere else, especially when you consider your point that you brought up in your videos, that because, you know, if it's a sequel and we already played Breath of the Wild, why would we explore the same terrain all over again? Like, it needs to be really, really new. So just doing an entirely new area makes a lot of sense there. But at the same time, I'm not saying we won't be going back to Hyrule. So it kind of depends, and I think we're going to dive into that later. But depending on where they go with Breath of the Wild 2, like if it's in Hyrule, I absolutely think the Descendants will be playing a larger role in Breath of the Wild 2, especially considering that they even played a role in Age of Calamity, and a lot of us thought that maybe Age of Calamity could tease some things for Breath of the Wild 2, and I think the Descendants playing such a larger role was one of those implications. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I tend to think so, because without I think we probably should not spoil Age of Calamity, I guess. But I would say that if you want to just say that they had a role in Age of Calamity, they have knowledge about things in that game. I'm trying to dance around stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point of showing us that they have this knowledge if it doesn't make sense for a future title? I mean, it could be wrong, but my running theory, which I think you're kind of going in that direction, is like, I think that some of the events of that game, including the champions, will have some kind of role in Breath of the Wild 2. It could be really small. It could be the main genesis and MacGuffin of the entire story. And I think, because you talk about where we might go in the game and all these things, giving us some answers, I also think what could give us answers is how far after Breath of the Wild 2 will take place? Like, is this 3 weeks after Calamity Ganon was defeated, or is this like 4 years later, right? And I think that one of the reasons that they show us Zelda with a different haircut, changing the haircut like on a female character, like in a movie or a video game, is just a really simple way for the storytellers to tell you time has passed.
Right.
It doesn't have to mean that, but it tends to mean that a lot of the time. So I just kind of wonder about, how long has it been? I think that'll tell us some stuff.
Yeah. Too. I mean, I think it's obvious that it hasn't been like decades, because Link and Zelda look pretty much the same age.
Pretty young.
But it could still be, it could still be within maybe 10 years, right? I mean, 10 years might be a little bit much, but like 2 to 5, is what I'm sort of thinking with that. Because I think if there's enough of... we'll just talk about this a little bit now. But I guess the thing is, like, if we are going to return to Hyrule, they need to make vast changes in order for it to make sense. Because I agree with you that because of Breath of the Wild, because it's a sequel, it makes sense for it to be all new. Like, if we're just kind of going through the same stuff, that's not gonna. It's probably not gonna be a good idea unless they remix it significantly and they have a lot of new areas on top of that. And I think that's possible, right? Like, if you see they're exploring what seems to be underground, the castle's causing seismic activity, it may be rising into the sky or going elsewhere, but it also could just be that the terrain's changing entirely. So you factor that in on top of the possibility of it being a few years where perhaps civilization is starting to rebuild. There are more towns and cities, more species are coming back to Hyrule. Like, we'll see different enemy types, different creatures and people. So the world becomes a lot denser, but also there's more there. Perhaps we see more things in the sky. Perhaps we go beyond those original margins of Breath of the Wild 2, and we go underground and everything's changed because of the earthquake.
Yep. Yeah, honestly, so what you said at the end there was one of my big theories, because, you're right about the interview where he says, oh, we're going back to Hyrule. And to me, that doesn't have to mean we're going to be in the same exact map, right? You talk about the boundaries, like, who's to say that Hyrule in the Breath of the Wild universe is only that square of the map that we see and use? Like,
have you seen the map for Zelda 2? Have you seen the map for Zelda 2?
The Adventures of Link? I mean, yeah, but it's probably been 20 years. So I'm going to look it up.
Look at the map for Zelda 2.
Okay, now you got me excited. Let me see here. Because it's one of those things, like, the good thing is when you're creating a story, you can do whatever you want. So you can be like, oh yeah, we're staying in Hyrule, but like, what if it's a section 70 miles to the west of Hyrule Castle, and then the entire game is somewhere else? Anyway,
I'm going to do a screen share here, guys. So bear with me. Okay, so, all right, this is the map of
this game as a kid. So.
Yeah, this is the map of Zelda 2. All of this, I think you guys can see it, right? Can you guys see what I'm looking at? Yeah, you guys can see what I'm looking at. So, all of this is the map of Zelda 2. But this bottom left area here is actually the map of Zelda 1. The map of Zelda 1 is basically all of Breath of the Wild. Like, so my point is that basically the world of Breath of the Wild is really just a small quadrant here in Zelda 2. And obviously they've added so much more to the world of Hyrule. But technically within the Zelda lore, there is this far larger region.
There you go.
Technically.
That works for me. Yeah, that completely works for me. I like the idea of having to go all the way back to Zelda 2. Did you see that somewhere, like on a video or something, and someone made that point? Or is that something you just kind of knew from the map of Zelda 2?
I honestly don't remember. I've known it for a couple of years.
Gotcha. Very cool. I've never heard that. I never knew that. And I mean, I'm an old man, so I played Zelda 2 when it was a brand new game. And I love and defend that game. It's hard. It's stupid hard. It's
ridiculous.
Yeah, I love that game, but I also hate it for that reason. But it's just, the good thing is, it's a great point. I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I just think it aids in kind of our theory here, right? Like, who says it has to be a place not called Hyrule that we go to? Because, it started as DLC, right? So that kind of hurts the theory, because you would think that DLC was just going to take place in the same map. So if they decide to take DLC in the same Breath of the Wild map and then turn that into a sequel instead, do they go far enough to say, well, now we can't be in the same map, we have to create a whole new one? I mean, that becomes tricky, but I just don't see how it's not going to be as exciting to be like, oh, I can go to the same stable. I can go to the same, I don't remember what it's called. What's the two mountains that have the split in the middle? Like, you can just go there and you'll be like, oh, I remember this from Breath of the Wild. Now I'm just here again. Like, you know, like, that's not exciting.
There's, like, I guess, again, like, if you do it, you have to remix it in a number of ways. And I know, I mean, there's all the teams that's spending basically, like, what, 4 years on a sequel using the same engine. Of course, they improve upon it and build upon it, but that's a long time for an already established engine that's a sequel. Like, oftentimes things like this are turned over in just 2 years. Once there's already an established engine in place, they've doubled that, it seems. And that's assuming it comes out this year, which I think we both agree with. But like, this game's gonna be huge regardless. So I guess there's just a lot of things they can do. Like, let's say it is like we do have to re-explore Hebrew Mountain, except this time around Hebrew Mountain actually has like towns and villages, but there's also been a lot of structural change to that environment. So there are things that hint towards how it used to look, but it's also very different. And on top of that, though, you look at what we have with this whole green hand thing, perhaps your method of traversal and platforming is significantly different in this game. So all of that together remixes things so significantly that it feels like a fresh experience. But on top of that, you still have just straight up brand new areas to explore. Perhaps underground Hyrule, perhaps unearthed temples and dungeons, perhaps areas in the sky, or beyond the margins. There's a lot that they can do, for sure.
Yeah.
Another crazy... Yeah, you go first.
Okay, well, I was going to say an idea that I think could potentially work and be really exciting if we were going to stay in the same map is I think of the Ocarina of Time, where when you go into the future, you know, Hyrule and Castletown and everything has been kind of like destroyed, right? And changed because it's been so long, and all of the destruction from Ganondorf has changed everything. Like, if you go to Death Mountain, it's destroyed and different. And if you go to the Hyrule Castletown, it's destroyed and different. And it was like, at the time, so mind-blowing and exciting. What if they just took that to the modern degree, where we're basically playing 4 years down the road, and maybe the Hyrule that we knew in Breath of the Wild is a completely disheveled, destroyed, chaotic mess in some way that changes the terrain and the buildings, the architecture, the enemies, like you were saying. What if they do that kind of effect? That to me could work.
I think that something like that could work. Now, this is kind of a criticism of Breath of the Wild, but also not. I feel like for Breath of the Wild, I love Breath of the Wild. It's one of my favorite games of all. It might be my favorite, like just for the record. Okay,
hot take.
But I feel like their design choice to create a dystopian world of Hyrule where everyone's basically dead was a very convenient choice, because what it enabled them to do was create this vast world, but for it to all make sense, so they didn't have to put in a lot of NPCs, they didn't have to put in a lot of hustling and bustling towns, which I really wanted to see. There was some of that, but it wasn't like to a significant degree that would be believable for a fully healthy Hyrule. But it made sense because this is not a fully healthy Hyrule. This is a dystopian Hyrule where there's been destruction.
Calamity.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, I guess my point is that they made a convenient choice, because ideally I would have loved to have seen Hyrule in its fullest glory. I would have loved to have actually explored Castletown. You know, that would have just been an incredible thing. I would have wanted to see, like, the actual the fortress in Akala. And we do get to explore these things in Age of Calamity, which is one of the great things about that game. It lets us to kind of do that to some extent, which is awesome. But my point simply is that, you know, it was a smart choice because it allowed them to create a large, fully immersive world that made sense, but also not have to put as much in it. So it was kind of a slightly easier to do. It's still an incredibly hard job what they did, but I'm just saying, a fully healthy Hyrule would have been even harder to do. And maybe they'll accomplish that with Breath of the Wild too. So, you know, because that's a possibility, because if they have repelled the Calamity, you would assume that civilization starts to rebuild again, as they sort of allude to at the end of Breath of the Wild 1.
Yeah. I like the idea of the repaired version of Hyrule being something where the denizens of the area start to move back into that map, that area. Like, obviously a lot of them would be dead and gone because of the war and everything that happened, But what if it's also that a lot of people who survived, they just fled, they just got the heck out of there, right? For however many years. And we start to learn that people are moving back. Also, something you said about, their convenient choice so that they didn't have to overpopulate that map with so many people. It kind of also reminds me that as much as I absolutely love the Zelda franchise, it's my second favorite franchise of all time. They've never been the best at overpopulating their areas. One of the biggest complaints about Skyward Sword, which again I love, is that there's not a lot of people. Like if you go to Skyloft, it's a cool idea, and I love Skyloft, but there isn't a lot to do. There's not a lot of people. There's not a lot of things. It's just like you would want it to be like this hustling, bustling, huge floating island town, and it's really just not that. And then of course you go through the sky, you get a couple of islands to land on where maybe there's like one guy who has like a tree cutting mini game and like the diamond falling mini, and like that's all they had. Like, and even at the time in 2011, people said even if they liked the game, they're like, yeah, but there's just, it's so underpopulated. You go to Skyloft, there's nothing to do in Skyloft, and it's like, yeah, that's pretty true. It's not their strong suit, I don't think.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, and there was a lot of comparisons at the time because it came out at the same time as Skyrim, which had a very believable world with tons of characters and towns. So I guess the problem with it is that when you play Skyward Sword, when you see how small it is in terms of the amount of characters, it kind of takes away from your immersion a little bit because you're like, oh, this doesn't seem like a believable community. And that was my thing. Yes. I wanted it to be believable. So one of my personal things about like games in general is that if there is a town and there's a lot of people in it, there better be a house and beds accounting for every single character in that town. Because if there isn't, it doesn't make sense to me.
High standards. Okay.
I'm not saying I'll just throw my controller away and not play through the game, but
no, but
it takes away from my immersion a little bit when I'm like, oh, this is not that believable.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So what about people who just could be passing through, who maybe don't have maybe they're just there for the day?
And occasionally that makes sense. If they are just on the side of the road and they have a certain story that seems to suggest that, I'm okay with that.
Okay. Interesting. Wow.
I'm not saying I count it like there's 103 beds and there's 104 people. Yeah. Something's wrong
That's
here.
what I picture in my head.
But
citizens.
If I see a dozen people and I see like 7 or 8 houses, okay, fine. But if I see 12 people in 2 houses and only 2 beds in each one, I'm like, hey, there's something wrong here. So
I like to imagine how you play every open world game, and every time you like discover a new town or something, you're like, all right, you run around counting the people, and then you go into every place looking for beds. I just like to picture you doing that. That's fun.
There's some truth to that, just not like
that's fair,
super specific, but
hey, we've all got our thing, man. I think that's funny.
So let me finish with the chat here. We're going to come back to Zelda because, I want to get through the chat. And, of course, I can't get through it to everything, so forgive me, guys. But, let's see here. All right, actually, this is probably a pretty good segue. Actually, you know what? I missed it. I missed it.
They jump around on us sometimes.
Oh, yep. The chat just jumps around. But, Ice Sonic Atomy. How do you feel about Bowser's Fury? Well, it's a perfect segue, because that's what we're going to talk about next. Yeah. So, we've already been talking about Bowser's Fury for a couple weeks already, but, recently we got some more, footage of Bowser's Fury, and we've gotten some reports in terms of, gameplay length and things of that nature. So, I'll just kind of show you this image right here. This is actually footage from Nintendo Life. They have posted some actual gameplay of Bowser's Fury, and I'll just kind of play it real quick. You can check out their channel, Nintendo Life. It's on their front page. But I'm just going to play a quick little piece of it right here. This is the map for Bowser's Fury. So this small little circle is legitimately just... It's not full screen. There we go. That's just, that small circle is just this area right here. It's just a small chunk, and you can see this entire black square. It looks like you can sort of push away all that ink and explore at least most of it. So it seems like a pretty sizable map to me, is my point here. And that's exciting. I don't expect Bowser's Fury to be, another Mario Odyssey, but if it ends up being the equivalent of a Kingdom or 2, I'm okay with that. that's a compelling amount of new content in there on top of all the quality of life enhancements we have with 3D World.
Yeah, and I think that I would even argue that just visually, what we've seen from that opening shot of that last trailer, where it's like Cat Mario at the top of a dome or something, and it's this great panning shot that just kind of shows you like the whole world, and you can almost visually look at it and see it seems to be just what you say. It's like a kingdom, or maybe even 2 Mario Odyssey kingdoms put together, which is, I mean, that's sizable. I can't lie. What's tricky is the amount of content doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the size of the map. So it's like, the size of the map could be really great and huge and be fantastic, but how much content is there within that map is a different thing. The original No More Heroes, one of my all-time favorite games, is actually a great example where it's got for the time, a pretty big open world map for Sans and Destroy. But as much as I love the game, it's perfect to me, there actually isn't a lot to do in that map. So you can't necessarily say, oh, the map is so big, that's how there's so much content, because it's like, well, it's a big map, but there isn't a lot of content. With 3D World, I do think there's going to be enough to do to make it probably really cool and fun. But I guess we won't really know until we get our hands on it. But it looks cool,
Yeah. I mean, with the Mario games, there does tend to be like a lot of collectibles to find, like a lot of extra little secrets. So for someone like me who likes to try and 100% Mario games, I think I'm going to find a lot to play here, because I'm not just going to go for completion, like to get to the end credits. I'm going to play to find every little coin and shine. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's probably going to add a lot more value. So we're seeing some reports that the game will take somewhere between 3 and 6 hours, which, by the way, I'm tooting my own horn here, but I think a lot of people pretty much agreed, including you, Rob, that I had made a video where I'd say the game probably be somewhere about 3 to 5 hours, and the reports are now 3 to 6 hours. So I was pretty spot on, but again, a lot of people, point is, like, I feel like I'm gonna be the kind of person that's gonna be in the upward 6 hour range, and I wouldn't be surprised if I find a way to do more, just because I like to sort of just use Mario games as like a playground and sort of mess around with the jumping mechanics and stuff. So it's gonna be fun for me, and that's 6 hours of gameplay is close to the length for a lot of really big games nowadays. So I think that's a nice little expansion to what's already a pretty beefy package.
You make actually a surprisingly good point that might almost be swaying me a little bit. Not like I've been down on it. Like, I think Bowser's Fury looks, freaking amazing. Mm-hmm. As far as just the content, the gameplay, I think it looks really cool. But, we know, like you said, it's 3 to 6 hours. That's pretty much been confirmed. And I've been like, well, I already played 3D World and I like it, but I don't need to buy it again. And maybe just a 3 hour expansion or a 6 hour doesn't really excite me too much. But, when you said that some games are actually close to that length as is, I'm like, that's actually kind of true. In fact, I made a case for, the Resident Evil 3 remake that came out last year that a lot of people were beating in 5 to 8 hours. And I put in 8.5 hours and I beat that game. And I was like, this game was so good. 8.5 hours was worth my $60 to buy this game and to play it for 8 hours. And it's like, well, damn, if I can play in 6 hours Bowser's Fury, that's whatever it is, like, 83% or whatever the percentage would be of what Resident Evil 3 was. And it's already tacked on to another game. So it does start to kind of add up a little bit in my brain. Which I just say as a detractor, somebody who wasn't fully on board yet. So, yeah, tough call. I mean, it just depends on, because I think, so you said you're going to play it for like the full 6 hours, and I think a lot of us will. That's the one thing is, people who have already played 3D World are probably going to want to milk Bowser's Fury for every possible minute anyway, just to get the most out of new content. So I think a lot of us would say, okay, it takes 3 hours to beat it, but 6 hours to 100% and find every coin and shine, like you say. I think most of us are probably going to want to do that. So, yeah, I've been on the fence, and I'm still not totally swayed, but your point actually really was pretty convincing. I might actually change my mind come next week.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, though, I'm kind of a 3D World hater.
Are you now? I did not know that.
So I've said this many times already, but
the cat suit thing, right?
Yeah.
You said that didn't work for you. Yeah.
It didn't vibe with me, and I like cats. I have a cat here. He's making noise. It's fine. But like I 100% in 3D World, so it's not the reason I say that so much is just to highlight that I did like the game, but it's still not my favorite 3D Mario game. It's kind of a little bit lower on the list actually. So, and also I didn't play it that long ago. I technically still have it on my Wii U. I could fire it up right now, and I got the game for $20. So it's kind of like, this is gonna be $60. And the other thing for me, I didn't like the multiplayer aspect for 3D World, and the reason being is because I'm not saying it's not good. It's just for me, because I really care about like the platforming and trying to do different tricks and stuff. When I have teammates that are messing with that and throwing that all off, that actually frustrates me a little bit.
Do you feel the same with New Super Mario Brothers 2? Kind of the same thing on that?
Yeah. I just don't like multiplayer platforming Mario games. Mario Party's fun, but like the actual platforming Mario games, I don't like the multiplayer. So that aspect of it doesn't really excite me too much, including the online stuff. Like maybe I'll give it a try. Maybe I'll take another stab at it. Maybe I won't be so crotchety this time around, and I'll be fine with playing with other people. But my point is that for me, it just didn't vibe too much. But the gameplay is sped up. The visuals are improved. And there's Bowser's Fury. And it just looks pretty. Like, the Nintendo fanboy in me is just kind of like...
It's a tough call.
I think I'm going to do it. Like, I know I'm going to do it. I'm going to get the game. And if it wasn't for Bowser's Fury, I wouldn't. Like, that is the difference maker. For sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we share very similar opinions. I mean, I've shared it on my own videos as well. I mean, 3D World is a good game, but I also don't love it. And I also don't love the catsuit thing. That was something that didn't... It's like the gameplay that it added was fun. So there is, that conflict that I have in my brain. It's like, well, it's fun to do the jumping and the pawing and the attack like that. It's fun, but the vibe is kind of a little cutesy, puffly kitty. Just like, it just doesn't really work for me. And then, the stuff you mentioned, like the game is sped up and the visuals are a little bit cleaner. To me, that quality of life stuff is neat, but it's definitely not enough to convince me on a Mario game that I think is just good but not great. So it really does come down to Bowser's Fury, and I'm still on the fence, so I'm not yet ready to say that I'm going to pick it up when I still own my Wii U copy. But I'll go back to what we were talking about. Your comparison with the 6 hours compared to some other full-price games does make me feel like if I paid $60 for it and I get 6 hours out of Bowser's Fury, am I going to feel like that was justified? And to Nintendo's credit, and I know that they thought this through, they did confirm you can just select it from the main screen. You don't have to go through anything and beat any whatever and get a certain percentage, which is good. It's very smart. I think other companies should do that with some of their DLC because it's sometimes hard to access DLC. So it's like if I want, I could just think of it like, oh, for $60 I'm buying Bowser's Fury and just play that from the beginning. So I don't know. It sounds like you're committed and you're saying, screw it, you're going to go ahead and get it.
I'm gonna do it.
I'm still on the fence, but I might give in come release day.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if there is a Wii U enhanced collection or port to sort of criticize, it's not 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, because everything I see Nintendo do with this, it's a fantastic job. If you didn't play 3D World on the Wii U because no one had a Wii U, this is going to be amazing. I think this game's going to sell incredibly well. It's going to be enjoyed by many. I think a lot of people are going to love this game. I think those little quality of life enhancements do a good job of enhancing the game for, I guess, the modern era, even though it's not that old of a game. Like, that's all great. And then the fact that it has Bowser's Fury on top of it, that makes it even more special. So I think it's going to be a really good package.
Do you have any other Wii U ports yourself? I'm just curious if you've purchased any.
That I've purchased? Well, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is Mario Kart.
We all fell for that one.
Yeah. I don't regret it. I wish there was more tracks added because I'm not a big battle mode guy. Because I'm not trying to take away from the battle mode. It's just not my thing. I would have wanted more tracks, but I noticed the visual bump from the 1080p. The HD rumble I actually really appreciate, like just drifting around the bends, like for me, that's just super satisfying. Having the additional item, that I really like those things all to me add to the experience. The purple drift, like that changes around a lot of the dynamics with racing and even like time trials, which I actually get into a lot for Mario Kart. I'm a fairly big Mario Kart fan. So for me, that's a big deal. So I would say like the first Wii U port was like the best one.
Yeah.
I was on the fence for Pikmin 3 Deluxe. I still might get it. Maybe if it's discounted at some point a year or two down the road. But I just haven't gone around. Part of it's just time though. Like it's not even that I don't think it looks fun. It's just time. I got a Bayonetta on the Switch. I have been meaning to get to Bayonetta 2 as well. So I've got a couple, but there's just so many different games to play.
Yeah, it's hard to choose to go back to something that you've already played. It's hard to do that,
Yeah.
Unless it's like a Xenoblade situation. Oh yeah, I guess that counts.
I've bought Resident Evil 4 like 4 times.
Yeah, that's okay. That game is amazing. So
yeah.
It's always worth a purchase. Doesn't matter. Always worth it.
Yeah. The Xenoblade Chronicles that actually finally finished the main campaign. I'm finally starting the Future Connected campaign.
Nice. I'm right at the end, and I have not. It's like, and I have this problem where I play games right up to like the final boss sometimes, and then I just am like, I don't need to do it, and then I'll put it down, and maybe I come back way later. So I'm at the same. I really want to play Future Connected because I adored Xenoblade Chronicles on the Wii. I bought it day one, when it was a GameStop exclusive in 2012, and I still have it on the Wii actually.
I think I actually did that too.
But
I think I bought
it at GameStop.
Yeah, the original. Yeah, and then I was like, oh my god, this is actually worth a lot of money.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, all those Operation Rainfall games, I have them all. Pandora's Tower and the special edition for Last Story with the box and all that. Like, I picked up all the, which is funny because 2 of those, Xenoblade and Last Story, are super hardcore JRPGs, which I'm not, which as a genre, I'm not a fan of. We discussed that, I think, last time I was on. But those 2 games are great. I love Xenoblade, and Last Story was really good. Really, really, really good. So it's kind of funny how that worked out.
Yeah. But just kind of bringing us back to the topic here.
Mario.
So this might sort of transition us into the next set of topics, but with Bowser's Fury, and I know you made a video about this talking about, I think we share similar thoughts, but perhaps also differ in some categories here. But so for me, because of Bowser's Fury and because Nintendo hasn't started talking about it yet, even though like 2 months ago I thought the exact opposite thing, I don't think Odyssey 2 is around the corner anymore. I think, like right now I'm actually starting to think that Bowser's Fury suggests that, maybe that sort of gives us some insight into some of the ideas the Mario team is sort of playing around with in terms of gameplay, exploring how to sort of combine that linear gameplay with that open gameplay and companion characters and things of that nature. And that's all exciting. But I think that it's extensive enough for me to say that I just don't think we're getting Odyssey 2 like anytime soon. Especially because I'm actually believe that the Odyssey team is working on a Donkey Kong game, which may sound crazy, but that's a whole other thing.
I don't think that's crazy.
But let's say it's true, though, right? Like, hypothetically, that is the case. Then, between Bowser's Fury and this Donkey Kong game, the Odyssey team probably isn't ready to make a new Odyssey 2. And while I don't think we're going to get the next, like, Switch, like, successor, not Switch Pro, like a Switch successor, like, next year necessarily, I don't think it's that far off either. So I think Nintendo has to start thinking about what are we going to have that's going to be like a big sort of launch window title to push this thing. If Breath of the Wild 2 is coming out now, you're not going to have Zelda ready for that. Zelda takes a long time to be made. And this is a sequel. It should have, so there's no way they're going to have the next Zelda ready for the next Switch successor is my point. So then you look to other things like Mario Kart and 3D Mario. So right now I'm sort of thinking that in terms of timeline here, this Bowser's Fury and potentially this Donkey Kong game, if it's true, is what we're getting from the Odyssey team until they're ready for Odyssey 2, which may come out 2 years from now, which is not that long from now, but still kind of like, not immediately.
Well, I do have to say, or I guess I should say, I have to ask, you are only talking about it in terms of Odyssey 2. Are you personally dead set that that's the next Mario game being made? Is a sequel to Odyssey?
Well,
and not something
I mean,
else?
at this point, I think we're just moving on from Odyssey.
Okay.
Yeah, I would be surprised.
And I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted an Odyssey 2. I believed there was going to be an Odyssey 2. Now I've moved on from that thinking. I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be Odyssey style, but I prefer the open-ish style of 3D Mario games. And Bowser's Fury is more of that. So to me, I guess that's the direction they're headed in. Like, don't you think it's kind of weird that a linear style Mario game, they put an open style Mario in there? Like, to me, it almost feels like Nintendo admitting that this sounds bad, but I think in terms of marketing, open Mario is more exciting than linear Mario.
For sure. It gives them a lot of creativity, too, to do that. And I mean, I laid out in my video basically this exact thing. And I saw your video on the topic where you had a theory about another Sunshine game, which I think is a really interesting theory, because I love Sunshine. I don't care what the haters say. But yeah, my running theory is that the next Mario game could be something that's more open, which is kind of what we're talking about in Bowser's Fury, and some of the stuff that they did with Odyssey is just showing, at least the way I'm interpreting it now, is incremental steps towards just going full out open. And I know it's cliche to make everything an open world game now, and it is. Like, maybe there's probably too many open world games. It's not that I disagree with that, but I also still think that there's a good chance that that just is what they're doing with Mario. And they could make an open world Mario game and even still call it Odyssey 2. They could combine those.
Yeah.
But I don't personally feel like Odyssey 2 is the game we're getting. I think they're just working on a brand new Mario game that's something we've never... It's a title, Super Mario, you know, Rising Star, or whatever they're going to call it, you know, something like that. So, yeah, and I also like that you kind of went into the whole possible Switch successor thing, because I obviously have a very strong belief that it's maybe sooner than a lot of people think. And if it's next year, or even if it's 2023, which I've also stated as a possible year, I absolutely think that there are titles Nintendo's already planning to fill that first year and the launch. I've said many times, Metroid Prime 4 to me is one of those games. Okay, so I do think Metroid Prime 4, I am 50-50. There's half of me that believes that game is going to be a cross-gen launch title for the next console based on the timing of everything. The other games that also make sense for me for a launch window or a launch year is Mario Kart, which you mentioned. I think Mario Kart 9 will probably be in that launch window, and the next Mario game, conveniently. So I don't think it's Mario Odyssey 2, but I do think they're doing something probably open world, and I think that it is probably something they're planning for the next machine. Because they saw so much success. If the Switch didn't launch with Breath of the Wild and continue crazy momentum in that first year, the Switch wouldn't be half as successful as it is now, even if it was just as great. So I think that they know that's the secret to keep success with their next machine.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious on your perspective here. So, because this is what I'm personally thinking, right? So my thought process is that we are getting something of a Switch Pro this year. Maybe it's not called Switch Pro, but maybe like new Switch or Switch Plus, something like that.
Switch Plus, yeah.
Right.
Super Switch.
And we get that. I actually think a Super Switch would suggest next generation, actually. But that's a...
Oh, okay.
So, just because NES and then Super
it.
And then Super NES, that's just my thinking behind it.
Sure.
But Nintendo could do whatever they want with names, really. But either way, like, it's a revision point is my point. Like something like that this year. And if that happens, I feel like Nintendo has to wait at least a year and a half, or probably closer to 2 years before they release their next system, which would place the Switch's life cycle somewhere around 6 years, which I think is a healthy life cycle for the Switch.
The Wii was 6 years.
Yeah, the Wii was 6 years, but the Wii's final year was bad. Like, yes, it had Skyward Sword at the end, but it was everything. It was kind of like I think Donkey Kong in 2010, and then not much all the way up until Skyward Sword.
Yeah, Skyward Sword really, and then 2012 was the year that Xenoblade came out. I don't know if the other Operation Rainfall games, but Xenoblade was like, I think, April or May and 2012 was that last year, because it was November 2012 the Wii U came out. So, but Skyward Sword was the big last hurrah.
Right, and I think Xenoblade technically was out in Japan soon, like before that, but it was just like the whole localization thing.
You got
it wasn't considered a big thing from Nintendo at the time, and then everything changed. But
yes, it sure did.
Yeah. My point is though is that I think the Switch is having such a healthy lifespan. I'm hoping it's healthier than the Wii was fine, but I think because a lot of the fan base of the Wii was mostly mainstream and cared about like basically Wii Sports and things of that nature. Most of them weren't core gamers, so a lot of Nintendo's core entries didn't really support the system for as long as they thought it would. But with the Switch, while it's mainstream in a way, it's mainstream with core gamers, right? So I think it's going to have a more healthy lifespan of like consistent sales and software. So my thinking is that final year, it's not going to be entirely dead. It's going to be fine. But I also think that means it's not going to be like a Wii U sort of thing where it's like 4.5 to 5 years. But I mean, if it's what you're saying, right? If it's holiday 2022, like that's still more than 5 years. That's still a pretty long lifespan. So like, I think that's possible. I just think my main reasoning is just that if a Switch Pro comes out this year, I think if let's say it comes out holiday this year, I think a year later to release the next Switch might be a little too soon, you know? But it comes down to if there's like, I mean, I guess I'm curious what your perspective is. Like if a Switch Pro comes out this year, do you still believe next gen Switch 2022, or do you move it up a little bit?
I definitely think if a Switch Pro or revision comes out this year, honestly, no, I would totally change my mind on 2022. I'm actually really glad you even brought this up because I've never really found a way to kind of state that in any of my like discussions about it, because I have long stated 22 as like a target, 22 and 23. But 100%, I mean, a Switch Pro coming out this year changes my theory, which is also why I'm very smart with my theories. Why I always say this is my theory, but I could be wrong. And I do still even believe it. I mean, I still believe it now. But yeah, if over the summer a Switch Pro comes out, there's no way I think 22 would be the launch year. 23, I think, still could fall in that time.
Yeah, it could be a March 2023 potentially, but I would think maybe March, holiday.
Yeah. I mean, but either one, I feel like that year of 2023 could make sense. When did the Xbox One X come out? Was that 2017 or 2018?
The Xbox One X.
Yeah, the One X.
Right.
When was that?
That's a great question.
Are you looking it up? Yeah, I'm curious because that's, obviously Nintendo doesn't have to do the same thing as Sony and Microsoft did, but it would give us a bit of a comparison.
November 2017.
Okay, really? Well, in that case, that's 3 years. From November 2017 to November 2020. For the Series X. So there you go. I think that it's not crazy for Nintendo to get 2 years post Switch Pro. So again, if it comes out this year, I do think 2022 is off the table for the next gen, despite my theory. But I would still think that 23 makes sense. It's a tricky thing to talk about. There's a lot of nuance to the idea and the conversation I've been having for so long about this, because it's undeniable the success of the Switch. It's crazy. It's better than I thought. When the Switch launched, you can watch videos that I made in 2016 and 2017. I never predicted it would pass 100 million units and pass the Nintendo Wii. But about a year or two ago, I completely changed my tune, and I think it's pretty obvious that I think we all expect that will happen. In fact, in a couple of hours, we know that their new quarterly financials are going to be releasing. So who knows? Why they have 85 million Switches sold? Like, it's just doing so well. So it becomes hard to understand when it makes sense for them to move from the Switch to the next gen Switch when sales are so strong. And in fact, the podcast I just did with Joey Ferris and Super Metal Dave, Joey even brings that up in that podcast about Sony making the decision to move on from the PS4 to the PS5 when the PS4 has been selling like crazy, and they still were like, this is the time we have to go next gen. Would Nintendo do that, or does Nintendo want to wait until Switch sales are truly dying and falling off the cliff before they do it? I tend to think no. I think it's almost smarter to ride momentum and success into your next generation. But it just makes it hard to predict, really.
There's just so many facets to this. It's not really even the topic for this podcast, right? But so we'll kind of wrap it up soon and kind of go back to the other stuff. But
sure.
it's tough because there's a few different things I want to kind of address with your point. So like one, I really like your thinking though that it makes more sense to sort of ride momentum into the next system. Because if you, like we just talked about, the Wii kind of sputtered at the end, right? And I think part of that sputtering led to the demise of the Wii U. Like, it wasn't just the Wii U itself, it was how Nintendo went into the Wii U. It wasn't a seamless transition at all, right? But then another angles to consider is cross-gen releases, right? Because if you look at GameCube to Wii, GameCube wasn't doing that well. So it made a lot of sense to sort of push Zelda onto the next system, right? And then the same thing for Wii U and Switch with Breath of the Wild. And I know you have your theory about perhaps Metroid Prime 4 being a cross-gen release. And I guess the interesting thing about that, because I do think Nintendo's going to hard push that game. Like, it's going to have, like, that quality level similar to Zelda. So in that sense, it makes sense as a potential cross-gen release. But a lot of it comes down to timing, too. Because if you're right, and it is a 2022 thing, I kind of have to agree with you. But if it's a 2023 thing, then I'm not sure. Because you also want Prime 4 to come out on the Switch, which we know is a successful system where things thrive. It's a huge opportunity for the Metroid franchise to sort of build up a better reputation and audience. So timing's really important for it, right? Like I understand that it's important to make sure that a game is good before it comes out, but also taking too long, I think, can kind of hurt a game's potential success here. Because let's say, and I don't want this to happen, I'm not saying it will happen, but there is always a potential that the next Nintendo system won't do that well, right? So what happens if Metroid Prime 4 takes too long to come out, right? And it is a cross-gen release, but by the time it comes out, let's say late 2023, the Switch sales have dwindled. No one really cares anymore. It's like almost like a Samus Returns situation. And they have it come out on the next Switch, and maybe it does help to sell it, but for whatever other reason, that next Switch doesn't do well either. Like, and then all of a sudden, Metroid Prime 4 is like, oh man, you didn't get your chance it didn't get its chance to find success, which I think would be really bad luck. Like there's a lot of ifs there that would have to happen. The Switch would have to lose momentum. Prime 4 would have to take that long. The next system would have to fail. And even if all those things were a thing, Prime 4 could still succeed if it's just an amazing game, right? Mm-hmm. But my point is that all of those things are factors here. Like it's kind of hard to gauge what's actually going to happen.
It sure is. But you bring up to me still what is the most crucial aspect, which is what Nintendo needs to do to help make a game like a Prime 4, which is kind of the point of what you're making there, what they need to do to make it successful. And it has to include the Nintendo Switch. No matter anything about the cross-gen or the next-gen, they're not going to deny that 100 million install base for that game. And they want Metroid Prime 4 to be the kind of savior and the rebirth, the reintroduction of Metroid into the zeitgeist again, and I really think they're going to nail it with their marketing and the quality of the game. But people have to be willing to buy it on the hardware it's going to be available on. So, and of course, how this feeds into what they would do at the next gen, it's honestly, like we were both saying, there's so many factors and there's so many variables. It's a crapshoot, So I've been talking about it the past, I would say almost a year maybe on my channel. I've really been playing it super straight, and it's just, I think the game is going to release around the time the next gen could be also releasing, and so a cross gen just makes sense for those reasons. But once you get into the nitty gritty, once you talk about a Switch Pro in 2020, once you introduce the pandemic, once you talk about Metroid Prime getting delayed and restarted, it does get really tricky to come down on like a hard prediction. So we can do what we can with the little info we have, but I still think 22 or 23 makes sense for that next machine,
so kind of like, I guess if I were to put like a prediction, it's like a two-way prediction, right? So if there is no Switch Pro, I would agree with you. 2022 we get the next gen Switch, and Metroid Prime 4 makes sense as a cross-gen release. And by that point, considering that sales are still thriving now, I think that would then mean that Nintendo absolutely is doing what you're suggesting, and that they don't wait till momentum dies. They allow it to bleed into it, and Prime 4 can succeed on both platforms. And the other interesting thing to that is that because it's like a mobile device sort of thing. Like it can almost have like the Switch can have almost a life like the 3DS did, where it had legs for a couple years after it should have. So there's that potentiality. But on the flip side, if I have my two-way prediction, right? So that's if a Switch Pro doesn't happen. But if a Switch Pro does happen this year, I think Nintendo, like showing off Prime 4 this year, showing off Breath of the Wild 2, may in large part have something to do with that Switch Pro as well, right? Maybe Nintendo starts uploading 4K trailers and things of that nature, you know? But I still think Prime 4 would be a 2022 release. But point is, if a Switch Pro comes out this year, I feel like at that point Nintendo wouldn't release the next gen system next year. It'd be a 2023 thing, which I think would place it past that window for Prime 4, unless Prime 4 takes too long. But I don't think it's going to take that long. So I think Prime 4 would still be like a holiday 2022 thing, along with maybe like the next generation of Pokemon. And then Zelda's this year, along with the Diamond Pearl remakes. And then 2023 is maybe like Mario Kart and Super Mario to push the next system. But they also could maybe have like a Super Switch or Switch 2 optimized patch for Prime 4, or like a Game of the Year edition sort of thing. You know, Sony does that with some of their big games too, right? Like they have those options.
Yeah, they sure do. I don't know if I see Nintendo stepping into that realm just yet, but Nintendo over the past several years has been adopting things that they used to not. So it is possible, especially if a Switch Pro and a next gen and all that happens. I do have to say, I got really excited there because you said something that I put out as a theory on a video probably like a year or so ago.
Okay.
That was fairly controversial. It was one of my higher viewed videos, but people really kind of pushed back on the idea. And it was the idea of, if part of the reason why it's almost easier for me to believe the next gen could be around the corner is the Switch could take on that second pillar role of the 3DS. It makes so much sense. I think in a world where next year we get a next gen successor machine, whatever it is, especially if it's like not a hybrid, why wouldn't Nintendo continue to support the Switch? And it almost becomes a de facto portable device more than it even already is for people. I think they can absolutely coexist for a good 2 or 3 years together. And because the Switch is a portable device, that could give it a leg up and help extend the life beyond the next generation launch. So
especially if they play the same games.
Theory, and I exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, if they play the same games,
it's really just kind of more like a Switch Lite versus Switch thing, just to a greater degree, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it really could be. So it's just, I think that the simplest way to think about it is the second pillar concept. If you have a next gen Nintendo console, and then your second pillar is your Nintendo Switch, the way you know it, and they just keep making games for it, and maybe you get some games that run on both, but the next gen is the better version. I mean,
really, Nintendo's basically doing that already, right? Because if you think about it, Switch Lite came out in 2019. When did the 3DS pretty much entirely die? I want to say the beginning of 2019, like the beginning
2018. When was that?
Like there was like,
what was that? Like?
It was very slow, but there was like a couple game releases that came out in 2018. I think there was maybe one more at the end of 2019.
Kirby's Epic Yarn.
Yeah,
like Kirby's Epic Yarn, and they did that. Is it Ever Oasis or whatever? Was that after Samus Returns?
I believe it was, but I think there's a couple other things. 3DS public.
Wait, they just did they just made an official retirement announcement of that console, didn't they? Wasn't that this year? Maybe it was this year. Listen to me.
Like production?
2020?
I don't.
Yeah, wasn't that 2020?
I'm
tell me what you find.
Entirely sure. I'm
curious. So September, I see September 2020, Nintendo ends production of the 3DS line. But so that's right. That was just a couple months ago that they officially stopped manufacturing it, right? But man, I mean, were they making games for the 3DS though? I think for at least the last year, I can't imagine they were making any games, right? What came out on the 3DS in the last 18 months? I don't think anything did.
I'm trying to find it. I think it's kind of hard for me to find right now, but
okay.
Let me see. I'm trying to find it like year by year, but I'm just not Googling the right things.
What, release dates? You mean like release dates?
Yeah.
Wikipedia is one of the best things you can do. They have a whole breakdown.
Because it keeps giving me things in ABC order. I want a year order.
Let me see if I'm just doing this on my phone here for some dumb reason. Oh, I guess they don't really have that list on Wikipedia. That's annoying.
I've seen it. It's not finding it here. That's really the thing. I haven't found a year list actually, but it includes like all Nintendo consoles. But if I go to, my theory is 2019.
Does anyone in the chat, is anyone saying like the last 3DS game? I bet someone in the chat.
There was a Yokai Watch in 2019.
The Yokai Watch.
But it seemed like 2018 seemed like the year where they had the most, like 2018 was the year where they had like a decent amount. 2019, like it's pretty much almost nothing. But point is that within about a year of the 3DS kind of coming to a complete stop, Switch Lite came out, right? And I think it just sort of lets credence to your idea that Nintendo likes having more than one sort of pillar there. Like the Switch Lite sort of took up the role of the 3DS, is my point.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, as a couple years go down, like, you know, Nintendo will introduce other products. Like we may get this other Switch, which may just phase out the regular Switch, right? Like kind of like how the new 3DS phased out the base 3DS. Eventually, you know, that may take up the role of the Switch Lite with the Super Switch or whatever. Like, you know, it kind of all makes sense here. But I want to. Is there something else you wanted to address with that, or are you ready to kind of move on?
No, I think we covered that pretty well, actually. Yeah.
Cool.
Pretty extensively. We're good.
Cool. Yeah. So I got a super chat here from Taker610. Thank you very much, Taker. Would you guys like a RE4 first-person remake? I know they're remaking Resident Evil 4, and there was like a big Resident Evil event. Yeah. I saw a lot for Resident Evil Village, which I am super, super excited about. I think it looks amazing.
Heck yeah.
I wasn't paying attention enough, I guess. I don't know what's going on with the Resident Evil 4 remake. Did they even like bring that up at all?
No, they didn't. And it was they pulled a little bit of some trickery and some tomfoolery, because a couple of days before the event, the official Twitter tweeted out like a video of the attaché case, the inventory case for Resident Evil 4.
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were like, tune in, you know, for the event. And everyone's like, oh, they're going to talk about the Resident Evil 4 remake, which was already confirmed anyway. And it turned out that all they did is they just confirmed that this game is going to have that attaché case from it. So it's like, so they didn't actually talk about Resident Evil 4. The question is about if they're going to do a first person, and I don't know if I could see them doing that. I'm thinking Resident Evil 4 remake is going to be just like what the 2 and 3 remakes were, is my guess.
Yeah,
which is fine. You know, it's fine.
I mean, I think I would actually prefer that. Like, it's not that I dislike the first person stuff, but Resident Evil 4, like, there's a lot of importance with Leon and the other characters, and not being able to see Leon, I think, would kind of hurt it a little bit, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And the over-the-shoulder gameplay is kind of part of what makes Resident Evil 4 special, I would say. So if you go away from over-the-shoulder gameplay to first-person gameplay, it's a little different. And again, like these Resident Evil remakes are changing the games dramatically. Like, it's not just a visual upgrade. It's a new game retelling the same story. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. So it's gonna be interesting how they handle Resident Evil 4, because I think Rob, I think you'll agree with me that Resident Evil 4 probably is like the best Resident Evil game of all time.
Yeah, that's actually one of my 5 favorite video games ever made. So
Same.
Definitely my favorite Resident Evil.
Yeah,
and the remake too, when that was announced, I mean, it's not that I'm not excited and I won't play it, but I just don't know that we needed it. I just think Resident Evil 4 is that game that didn't need it the way 2 and 3 or even 1 was. People forget that Resident Evil 1 actually got the remake beforehand on the GameCube in 2002, which is actually my personal favorite of the remakes. I prefer that old school style. So with Resident Evil 4, you know, because I think they would probably do it in the same style as the 2 and 3 remake, it's like you're not actually changing that much of the game. What they did,
it was like they made the remakes are like the RE4 style to begin with.
Got it. That's basically what it is. They just made 2 and 3 like RE4. So you know, you could almost argue, because of the truth of that, maybe the question has more merit. Maybe that's the big change and what convinced them to make a Resident Evil 4 remake. It's not just better graphics. What if it's because they are going to change it as much as to make it first person? I don't believe that, but it just makes me wonder about the question, you know?
Yeah, I see your point with that. Maybe. I want them. I want them to change something. I want them to do something that adds to the experience. I forget the name. I haven't gotten around to playing Resident Evil 3 yet, by the way. I'm still actually working on 2. But there's that scary dude that follows you around, right? Like
Nemesis.
Yeah. I think in 2 is 2 also Nemesis as well?
Oh, in 2 it's Mr. X.
Mr. X, right? But that sort of element is not in Resident Evil 4. So adding that element, I think, could make things super interesting. So there's that to consider. And I mean, actually, Resident Evil 4 has there's like a couple spots that have elements like that. Like, you know, when you're in the sewers and there's like that giant black weird thing that's like super fast, it climbs through the ceilings.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, when you're it's in the castle, but like in the sewers of the castle or something.
Yep. Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, like that's kind of similar to the Mr. X thing a little bit, but in a more contained area.
And that's the tricky thing about it, though, because
you can't
the
do
reason
both, or can you?
You can't, and the character that chases you works when you're like stuck in an area, and Resident Evil 4 is kind of an ongoing adventure, like you really traveling throughout that whole game. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it becomes hard to figure out how they could do it.
Yeah,
I'm open to it, though. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious how they're gonna change things around for sure. But that's probably not coming to the Nintendo Switch. So we're gonna move on here. So let's talk about Metroid Prime. And maybe if we have some time, we'll talk a little bit about Zelda afterwards, if there's time. So I'm just let's just start things off here. Like, where are you standing right now with Metroid Prime 4 in terms of when we see it? I mean, I know we talk about this every time, but it's like, you know, every couple months things change. Like, for example, like I said earlier, like if we go back to like November, I thought Mario Odyssey 2 was a thing, and now I don't.
Yeah, our opinions are ever evolving. I've talked about it a lot recently. I am firmly in the camp. I think that it's good. We're going to see it this year. I even conducted a poll to see how people felt about it, and while it was close to 50-50, I think like 1,600 people voted in it. Most people seem to err slightly on thinking we won't see it this year, but I just think it makes sense. This is the year after 3.5, almost 4 years since it was shown, and 2 years after the delay, that I know they've got something that they could show. They have a workable, playable something of that game that will look and play like the final game. I know it. I just know that they've got something. And I go back and forth with how to say this, but I do think that there's a chance that Nintendo feels like they do maybe owe something to the people who've been waiting so long for this game. You know, they're not stupid. They're not unaware of the fact that it's been a roller coaster for people who are waiting for Metroid Prime 4. And, you know, only they know when the game is supposed to come out. But if we go on the feeling that a lot of people have that it's coming out in the next year or two, maybe 2 to 3 years, I don't know, there's something in the air that feels like 2021 just has to be the year that they finally are willing to show something. And as I've said on a couple of videos and podcasts, all they need to do is 30 seconds. A 30-second trailer with some gameplay and show us Samus. 30 seconds. It's not that long, Nintendo. I think that's all they need to do. So I'm putting my money on this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. The thing to say, though, is that every year I thought we're going to see Prime 4. So, you know, there's that to take into consideration. But to sort of build upon your argument here, Metroid's 35th anniversary is this year, right? And there is a window, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, there is a window in which Nintendo needs to release Prime 4, I think. Because if you take too long, one, you may miss that gap of when the Switch is doing so well where everything succeeds, right? But also, I think there's an argument to be made that if you just take too long after the announcement of something in general, you can sort of lose interest. And I have friends that were not necessarily big Metroid fans, but knew how much I loved it. I've seen all the excitement on the internet and such and things of that nature, and we're like, oh, this seems like a really cool other sort of Nintendo thing. I love Zelda, I love Mario, but this is like a different type of Nintendo game. I'm really curious what they would do with that, you know? Like if you think about it from like a non-Metroid fan's perspective, like just seeing Nintendo do something that's like dark and sci-fi and alien, like that's a different kind of Nintendo, but still Nintendo, right? But the problem I'm getting at here is that some of those people are like canceling their pre-orders and things of that nature. Like I think Nintendo does need to talk about it eventually, because fans, you got to keep the good faith. Kind of going back to what you're saying about like sort of owing fans, and it's not to say it's not to. I mean, you kind of talked about it in your discussion with Joey and Dave. Like you're not so much like entitled. Like we're not entitled to it necessarily, but there's value in sharing it with us, because it is kind of like an act of good faith, and it does sort of, there is something important to the relationship between fans and creator. So I think they should do something for sure. It makes sense, and it doesn't have to be anything major, like you said, like a 30-second teaser or something like that. I think if it's something comparable to the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer.
Oh, great. Like the 2-minute trailer? Yeah, that would be amazing.
That is a little bit. It's a little bit longer, right? But
Oh, the Breath of the Wild 2. I'm sorry. Yeah. I was thinking of the original Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, no, I meant the teaser in 2019. That the sequel trailer. Yeah. Like if we get something like that, I think that's enough. Just to give us an idea of the visual style, how it's kind of like. I would love to see some first person aspect of it, just because it's Prime. But something like that, give us a hint to the story. Maybe it can like show us how Ridley's gonna look, or maybe show us Kraid or Silex or something.
Kraid.
What if, right?
Well, it's not, depending on where this game takes place, it's not impossible. People sometimes forget the Prime games are before Super Metroid. Doesn't mean that Prime 4 has to take place at that time. Prime 4 could take place after Super Metroid, but the Prime trilogy is between the first and second game. So Super Metroid and Kraid, that's way later. But I do think it's worth noting, kind of building on what you're saying too. And the whole thing about the 30-second trailer is I just think that this game finds itself in the unique position where 30 seconds would, I think, feel like enough to a lot of people. And when I discussed this on my video at the beginning of the year, kind of laying out my thesis about why I think that 2021 is the year we would see it, that was kind of part of what I said. Like in any other year, with any other game, in any other situation, if you've been waiting and you finally see just like 30 seconds, people might be like, that's it, that's terrible, boo, we want more, whatever. I don't think that's the case with Metroid Prime 4. I think if the 30 seconds is substantial, and maybe mirrors the middle chunk of that Breath of the Wild 2 trailer you talked about, as far as how much substance and content is there, I think people are going to be happy. And doubly so if they would have the guts to say at the end of the trailer, coming
2022.
Just coming 2022. That, oh my God, I get chills. Like, we would all be like, yes, we've seen the game and we know when to expect it, even though it could be delayed beyond that, right? I mean, that's never going to be a hard date, but it's going to feel so good if we just see the words coming 2022 or even 23, like whatever year.
Yeah.
Just to see Nintendo and hear them acknowledge it and give us some kind of a window of time to expect it. It would get the job done. It's not going to be, and how could that possibly, I didn't talk about this in my discussions about it, but how could that hurt the game? How could it hurt Nintendo after 4 years? As of this summer, it will be 4 years since it was announced. How could it hurt them to show 30 seconds of gameplay? I don't see how it does any damage to the mystery or to the game. So yeah, these are just the reasons why it makes sense to me.
I don't think showing the game 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever it ends up being, I don't think that hurts it. But the 2022, like if they give us a release year, I think there's a lot of power behind that, considering the circumstances of how we've been waiting for so long, and we haven't really been given any tangible information from Nintendo in terms of when we should expect it. So to finally get something after so long like that, that's powerful. It would have a lot of meaning to us fans, but at the same time, because of the history, because of the hurt, because of the delays, Nintendo saying that is also risky, because Nintendo may not want to put themselves in a position again where they have to disappoint us, even with Breath of the Wild 2, which had, I would argue had a much better reason for us to expect for it to come out sooner than later. And they didn't give us they just said it's in development, even though technically we've known it's been in development for longer. We know they've been working on it since 2017.
Yeah.
But they said it's in development in 2019 with that trailer. They didn't give us a year, probably because they weren't sure when it would be ready.
Yeah.
So,
man, I think you're right.
But at the same time, like maybe Prime 4 will be more further along, and they'll be more confident about a 2022 release. And given what to your point, that it would just kind of there was something special about that. Like they may do it. Like I'm not saying either way. I'm just kind of talking about both sides of the issue here.
For sure, yeah. Because I think that we would probably both agree it doesn't need to have that at the end of the trailer, the time window or whatever. Like I said, I think this game is in the position where everyone would be fine just seeing 30 seconds of gameplay. But if they were comfortable and confident enough with whatever they know that they're doing to give us a window of time, just get out of town. I mean, that would be so amazing. We'd just be like, how much more real would it feel if we just had those, the two words coming 2022? Like, I don't even know what to say. It's just like it stops my brain dead in its tracks. I get so excited.
All I want is font. I don't even need gameplay. I just need font. Give me the title. Give me the 4. And 2022. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I want gameplay. Absolutely. But yeah, for sure. There's a lot of value there. But I want to kind of talk about a couple other theories because I know you got a chance to see my video, just kind of talking about who the main villain or antagonist might be in Prime 4, and I sort of talked about Sylux and Ridley and perhaps a new Metroid Prime. But you said I saw in the comments you said you had your own kind of like theories on who may be doing what in Prime 4. So I'm just kind of curious on if maybe you could kind of expand on that.
Well, it's not so much a who might be doing what. A lot of it honestly fell in line with what you were saying. How I think because everyone's been so attached to the Sylux thing, and for good reason, because the last time we saw anything current from the Prime series, we get the Sylux ship. And then you talk about Sylux showing up at the end of Federation Force. I mean, it's very clear that they're planting seeds for Sylux to play a big role. So it's not so much a who's pulling the strings. I don't really have necessarily hard theories on who might be pulling the strings.
Okay.
Beyond like a Sylux or a return of the space pirates, some faction that maybe we don't know is still out there doing something. I mean, I think about those things. What I kind of like actually about the prospect of the Prime 4 story is actually not knowing that stuff and not even really having a hard theory on it, believe it or not. Now, as far as players, that's where things get exciting.
Okay.
Is the Chozo going to be involved? I think there's a chance the Chozo could be involved. And in fact, I really want it to be about Samus discovering more of the origin of the Chozo. Is Sylux and or the Space Pirates and or Metroid Prime / Dark Samus going to be involved? Sylux, 99% yes. Metroid Prime, 80% yes. They might try to do some weird trickery where Prime isn't involved and still call it Metroid Prime, but I don't really, and so it's just all that stuff. But the whole Sylux thing is something I've had a big theory about. And it's the fact that I think Sylux will fill the role of Dark Samus in the original games, which is also what you said in your video. Yeah. He's going to be that secondary foe. He's going to operate the way Girahim or Zant did in the Zelda games, where they weren't the final foe, but they were maybe the antagonist you had to deal with throughout your journey before the big final foe is revealed at the end once you actually would defeat Sylux. They might do a team up thing. I've kind of had this thing like, what if they make them team up or whatever?
I don't think Sylux is necessarily evil, by the way. Which might make things interesting. It might be more of an anti-hero, which I think, because I don't want to spoil too much about the Metroid story, but we know that towards the end, and with Fusion, there is a lot of implications that Samus is not necessarily in line with the Federation anymore, right? Sylux could shed more light on that potential storyline, even though it's in the future. That could sort of place more, build more lore around that idea that Samus being aligned with the Federation isn't necessarily the only way things have to be.
Yeah, 100%. And in fact, when you talk about the Fusion story and her connection to the Federation, I mean, I think they basically tell us that outright. And that's even planted, even though the game came out later. Other M further develops that and plants the seeds for it by the way it ends with I don't even actually know the guy's name. The
Adam
Captain
Malkovich?
Federation guy. No, it's like the boss of Adam Malkovich like shows up at the end and is like real, to kind of clean up the mess on the bottle ship after everything is done, and he's all like, "Ugh, suspicious, weird," and all this different things, and she's already not even working with the Federation. That's the whole thing, is she's long since left them, but gets involved with this team and Adam Malkovich, and then that carries into what she remembers in Fusion. And so long story short, I just think that what you're saying is right about her relationship to the Federation. But I also think that there's a chance that they might plant some seeds about the SAX gene. You know, there could be some sort of, and it would almost be more Easter eggy than like the point of Metroid Prime 4, but I love the idea that they might do something to kind of state that the SAX gene is already kind of made aware of or being learned about or discovered at the time that Metroid Prime 4 happens. If it's not a huge time jump from 3 to 4 and it's more in that time frame, I just kind of think that there's a chance that they might do that, because I also think that a Metroid 5 is coming, right? A game that takes place after Fusion, and
perhaps
I think that
what's made by Mercury Steam. Maybe
very likely,
yeah.
Mercury Steam. So maybe they just use Prime 4 to grease the wheels a little bit, and then it just becomes a great fun Easter egg moment for people who know the lore in Prime 4.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can kind of go both ways too, though. So I like sort of drawing like comparisons to other Nintendo franchises. Like we've seen that Nintendo's like released the Zelda remasters, and those remasters have sort of had some suggestion about the next Zelda game, like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess or Breath of the Wild to an extent. Maybe, and I'm of the frame of mind that we see this 2D Metroid before Prime 4. Hard to say how it actually all sort of pans out, because it's also Prime Trilogy, and it's tricky how all that will come out. But I do believe all of that's in the works, right? Like maybe this new 2D game, be it Metroid 5 or a Fusion remake or something along those lines, like that's gonna build. It's all about that story. It covers that story, right? So if Silex is involved here, they can kind of connect with each other and sort of like, you know, the lore in both can kind of they can complement each other.
I really do expect it, which is where the kind of Fusion connection theory came from.
Yeah, because
I also think, and I think I've heard you say similar things before too, I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to represent a bit of a rebirth of the franchise, and it's going to represent, I think, a new era of A, success for the franchise, because we both think Prime 4 is going to be a successful game, and B, Nintendo's renewed push and faith and support of the franchise. And so why not, I don't want to say MCU it, so to speak, because that's not really what it is, but like, why not make this rebirthing game of Metroid Prime 4 a reason to start planting seeds for other things? And Fusion is already a very well-beloved game for good reason. It's a great game. And if we expect the Metroid franchise to continue beyond that story with the Metroid 5 and yada, 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 I mean, Prime 4 is your big AAA, huge budget return of Samus and Metroid. Start planting seeds for where your story and your franchise could go afterwards. Like it just lines up to me, you know?
So this is kind of taking the conversation in a slightly different direction. And you guys kind of talked about it in your discussion before, but I'm just kind of I want to kind of dig more into that. But how do you feel about the naming for Metroid Prime 4? Like using that 4 sort of naming here, because my thinking is that, well, yes, I want people to know this is the next big entry in Metroid Prime 4. Like there's a certain energy to that name, right? But I think what I ultimately want for Metroid is for it to become consistent, like Legend of Zelda, like Super Mario. And what you'll notice with the Legend of Zelda games and the Super Mario games, even like they're not called Legend of Zelda 7 or Super Mario 19. It's just the name, subtitle, and there's a 2D version, there's a 3D version. Same thing with Metroid. And with the 2D Metroid games, even though we know there is like a number for them, the names don't have the number, right? So my thinking is that if Prime 4 is a success it's going to become, it could mean consistent Metroid games. Like instead of it being Mario, Zelda, it could be Mario, Zelda, Metroid, right? So maybe there's an opportunity to do away with the numbers and just call it Metroid Prime, and whenever you see Metroid Prime, you know that means first-person Metroid. And it could still be Metroid Prime 4, but it's just like not really a part of like the branding necessarily. The same way how I believe like Super Metroid is Metroid 3, right? But it's not called Metroid 3 in the branding.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good theory. It's a really good question. I think there's a possibility, because the big thing you're saying is maybe they just remove the 4 from Metroid Prime from Metroid Prime 4 to make it more accessible to people and open up future titles.
Yeah.
There is absolutely a chance. I don't think it's a crazy theory. They might do it. My personal belief, though, is that they won't do that, and I think that they will stick with Metroid Prime 4 for this title. And there's a couple of reasons why. One of them is, I think, not going to be popular with a lot of people, but I truly believe, I don't think I've heard anyone else say this, people seem to think the opposite. I truly believe this will be the actual finale. I don't think we're revisiting the Metroid Prime saga after 4. I think that when they I really truly believe. Now, obviously, I think the franchise is going to hopefully continue to have new rebirth life. That's great. But the Prime name, the Prime story, not necessarily first person, because they could go in first person in a future title, and that's fine. But just the engine, the feel, the music, Retro's overall philosophy and approach, everything that is Prime, I kind of lean towards thinking this is Nintendo's way to finally just put the bow on it and say, we're done. This is it. This is the last story. There are people who talk about this being the beginning of a new trilogy of Metroid Prime games. And while anything is possible, it doesn't feel that way to me. I think that I think the reason we are getting Metroid Prime 4 is because whenever Nintendo decided to come back and make a new console Metroid game a couple of years ago, they were like, what's the best way to make it successful? Because we struggled with Metroid. Other M didn't work. Federation Force, everyone hated it. Like, why can't we figure out Metroid? But they knew the Metroid Prime trilogy were well beloved, well reviewed, and all sold well. Those are all sold well. And so I think they're like, you know what? Here's the way to grease the wheels for the franchise and just reintroduce it safely and with confidence. Let's make one more Metroid Prime game. Let's make a 4. It's going to be easy, hype, and it's going to have a built-in audience, and it's going to be great. And so I believe that their purpose in this is to wrap up everything Metroid Prime. I think it's going to end the story completely. And in doing that, I don't think that they need to play around with the titles, so to speak. I think that they call it Metroid Prime 4 to let everyone know it's the conclusion, it's the continuation, this is what it is. And your theory about the Metroid titles going forward being able to be things like a Super Mario Odyssey, a Super Mario Galaxy, Sunshine, whatever, to me, I just see that as all the non-Prime stuff. Metroid Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission, Metroid, Dread.
I think I lost you for a second.
Right? It's all theory. Oh, no. Oh, can you hear me? I can hear you.
I can hear you now. It just clipped out for like 5 seconds.
Okay, it seems like it did. My internet sucks in my new house, so I am so sorry this happens every time we podcast, man.
No, it's fine. It's just a couple of hits. We're good.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my long rambly theory. I think that's what they're going to do.
Yeah. As I see Joey, Ferris Wheel Pro in the chat said, Rob, this take is bold. I do. I feel like it is a bold take, my friend. And I'm not saying I don't like straight up disagree necessarily. I hear your point. Like I'll give you that. I think Metroid Prime 4, like, that makes sense because of the history and the lead up and to sort of reintroduce the franchise. It's kind of like the Half-Life 3 sort of thing, right? Like it's a meme almost. It is a meme. It's not almost. It is. So kind of bringing that in, it's a great way to reintroduce the franchise to the world. I get that. That makes total sense. But I also feel like there's got to be the 3D Zelda, there's got to be the 2D Zelda, there's got to be the 3D Mario, there's got to be the 2D Mario. And I would say the 3D Mario and the 3D Zelda are more important than the 2D Mario and 2D Zelda in terms of sales, right? And I would also say that I think the same will apply for Metroid as well. I think the first-person Metroid needs to stay a thing. And then 2D, I think it's really both. I think we should have both. And it maybe doesn't have to be called Metroid Prime. That's totally possible. But I guess the way I could see it, I'll give you that calling this next one Metroid Prime 4 makes sense, but maybe moving forward, now that the series is established, they got to find a way to make it clear, hey, look, this is first-person Metroid, this is side-scrolling Metroidvania-style Metroid. However they choose to brand that, you know, we'll see what Nintendo does, but I do think that's what they kind of want to do moving forward.
Possibly. I mean, I see what you're saying about trying to keep alive a 3D Metroid and a 2D Metroid. I don't necessarily think that 3D Metroid has to be kept alive only in first person, though. So that's where I'm not totally committed to the idea that it only is going to be first person and they're only going to call it the Metroid Prime name going forward. You know, again, freely admitting it could be wrong. It's nothing more than a theory. I'm just using my own fanship and history to just make a theory. Yes, I do feel pretty good about it, though. And so I'm gonna stake my claim. Like, I really think that Metroid Prime 4 will be the last Metroid Prime game, and I'm willing to believe first person could still be part of the future, but I don't think that it's only going to be first person or 2D going forward.
Okay.
Metroid Other M is the perfect example. Why wouldn't they do another just third person 3D game in the future? I think they might go that direction.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like maybe I see what your point. Like, I actually wouldn't mind like more like Other M tried to be kind of like a hybrid. Like, it was like a 2.5D Metroid, but also with first person elements. So it was very interesting sort of that dynamic they had there. I wouldn't mind if for future 3D style Metroid games that they have a mixture of first person and third person elements, because third person, I mean, that's fine. Like, I wouldn't mind that at all.
Sure.
I mean, even the Metroid Prime games, they still have those third person elements, right? Whenever you transition to Morph Ball mode is entirely third person. So yeah, it's still part of the game already. But, you know, like actual like third person exploration on foot with shooting and things, I think they can maybe do that still. And if you think about it, to your point, like if you look at some other games like Other M where it has those first person elements, or even Samus Returns, if you go to Samus Returns, there's a couple cutscenes, or at least one, where they show Samus in first person. Like, it's kind of like nodding towards that style. Like, that could just become a element for Metroid games moving forward as a whole, where that's always an option for them to do, but it's not necessarily what they'll always do. And I'm okay with that. That's fine. For sure. That could be the case. We don't know what Nintendo will actually do, but that's cool.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes me realize I should clarify. I'm not trying to completely write off first-person Metroid games forever. That's really not what I'm saying. But I do think that there's just a good chance that Prime 4 could wrap up this story, this approach, Retro's entire Metroid Prime everything. And going forward, it's going to be different teams making different games that could be 3D, third person, 2D, first person, all these different things. But that Prime 4, you know, and reminding ourselves that this started with the concept of the title. And that's really where I came down to the idea that I think they're willing to call this Prime 4 and leave the 4 in the title, because I think that they will wrap up the Prime story and the Prime games with this fourth game. I'll ask you here.
Yeah, go.
Do you think that they're trying to do like because people talk about, oh, this is the beginning of a new trilogy of Prime games, like they're going to continue 4, 5, and 6. What's your personal take on that? Do you think that's what they would do?
No, I don't think it's going to be another trilogy necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't mind it, but it kind of just goes back to what I think. I think Metroid Prime 4 is more going to be just a reboot for the entire franchise. And, you know, I some of the things you brought up are very interesting. I do think it may sort of reshape my thoughts potentially. Like, I do think that they should consider, or they shouldn't lock themselves to only first person moving forward for 3D Metroid games. They should consider other options. But I think the 3D exploration, we don't have to necessarily say it has to be first person necessarily, but like the 3D adventure Metroid games need to be a thing. And I think first person needs to be a staple, but doesn't have to be a constant, right? I think that is what's going to happen, is what's going to be, regardless if they call it Prime or not. Like, we are going to get more Metroid games moving forward, but they're not necessarily going to tie into the Metroid Prime timeline. That they're not going to lock themselves to that. So I think it's not going to be a trilogy. It's just it's just going to be indefinitely more Metroid. It's the same way we always expect there to be a 3D Zelda per console, or sometimes 2, or a 3D Mario. I think just moving forward, there's just going to be a 3D Metroid consistently. And I think that's what's so... Metroid Prime 4 might end up being one of my favorite games ever. Like, I have such high anticipation for this game. But what's also exciting going beyond the game itself is that it has a huge potential to make it so Metroid Prime 4 isn't going to be this once in a decade or 2 decade kind of game. It could make it so like this kind of game is something we see more often, like Zelda and Mario, which is super exciting to me. So really, I'm not thinking trilogy, I'm thinking indefinite 3D Metroids moving forward.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that works for me too. That's when we talk about this being that rebirth and that kind of reintroduction of Metroid into the zeitgeist. I mean, I totally agree. But I think people should prepare for Metroid Prime to end with Prime 4. That's my current message. That's my theory. And this is the first time I've even brought it up. I've never brought it up on a video before. But I just feel like that might be what we're seeing. And Nintendo was like, let's get this done. Let's wrap it up. And in a good way, not the Rise of Skywalker way, where I think they tried to wrap.
And to be clear, you're really just focusing on the story of. You mean the story of Metroid Prime, right? Like, gameplay-wise, you're not saying first person's going away, but you're also saying that it doesn't necessarily have to be locked to first person either, which I think is a great point.
100%. But I also think that means it sounds silly to say this, but it also means like the engine that is the Prime 4 games. Because you can picture a first-person Samus game, and it could look, feel, and play. 5 different first-person games could look, feel, and play like 5 different kinds of games. Mm-hmm. But the Metroid Prime games and engine that Retro Studios has made is a particular game. It's a particular feeling and philosophy that they've put into those games. They could make first-person games that look and play and feel completely different in the future, that won't be retro, that won't be that proprietary engine, and then it's a whole different era. Think of how, the old Call of Duty games and the old Halo games play and look and feel different, even though they're both machine gun first-person games. So they could do something like that, if that makes sense.
I'll also tell you that the Metroid Prime game, Samus feels very tanky, but Samus isn't supposed to be slow and tanky. She's supposed to be agile. So there's something to consider there. Maybe you think of more of a hybrid third-person sort of thing, or maybe you think of something more along the lines of Mirror's Edge. Like, there's different ideas they can sort of play around with.
Or
maybe
Doom,
Doom.
The recent Doom games,
But Doom actually has a lot of elements that seem very Metroid-ish in terms of the gameplay, so that's a really interesting point to bring up. So, there's things they can play around with there, and actually, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of those elements in Prime 4, because I do think, while I love the Metroid Prime 4 gameplay, I do think there's some things that they need to sort of tinker a little bit to appeal to a slightly larger audience. It doesn't mean taking away from what is Metroid Prime gameplay, but there are some things they could do to make it a little bit more accessible, like perhaps speeding up that gameplay a little bit, perhaps tinkering with how scans are done. I think scans are awesome. They should stay, but I think sometimes it could be overwhelming for people. So how they convey that information, I think, is also important.
Totally. Things like audio logs and whatnot, things to make it more modern, because it's crazy to think about. If we're right and next year, 2022, is when the game releases, that means it's 15 years between 3 and 4. So a lot changes in terms of how games are made, what the first person genre is like, what the hardware that we're playing on, the graphics abilities. I mean, it's a totally different gaming landscape than it was when Prime 3 came out.
Yep.
So all that stuff, you're totally right. I mean, they have to. I definitely think they're going to be modernizing a lot of the elements and mechanics in Prime 4, but I don't think it's going to be this huge, massive polar shift in gameplay that some people talk about.
It's going to still be Metroid Prime,
yes,
but it's going to be there's going to be some things that might be really nice enhancements, but it's still be Metroid Prime. 2 things I want to bring up, and they're like, so one, I just want to say going back a little bit. To kind of aid your theory here that Metroid Prime 4 is going to kind of tie a nice little bow on the Prime series. I was looking when I was doing a little bit of research for my previous Metroid video talking about Silex and all. I was looking at an interview with Kensuke Tanabe, and it was back in 2015, and he was saying that he still had some ideas left for the Metroid series before he's done. Mm-hmm. Just the way it was worded seemed like he was alluding to that he doesn't plan on doing this indefinitely, but there is something else he wants to do with it. implying that perhaps Prime 4 could be the end of him working on it. But, you know, obviously we'll see what happens. But going to the other idea I wanted to bring at you is going more towards gameplay, right? Like in terms of the scan feature, the way I sort of envision them making it work is kind of like an auto scan feature where you don't have to stop the gameplay and just focus on scans while things are shooting at you. And it's still scanning. Like you kind of have to look at it, but it kind of happens in real time as opposed to having to switch. And you can opt into having the audio. Like I think you mentioned like audio logs, right? Like you can opt into having your computer sort of tell you as you're exploring the world.
Yeah, I mean, those are
as opposed to just stopping and reading.
Totally, those are the perfect kind of modern enhancements. And I mean, it's not like there aren't games that still do the reading logs and like codexes and things like that. A lot of the heavy RPGs, I mean, even the Doom games actually, there's logs you pick up and you just read a wall of text. So it's not like that's completely gone from the industry, but I do think for Prime 4, it might, like you're saying, it might be too much for a lot of people, especially new people, to play Prime 4 and be like, man, there's a heck of a lot of reading in these Metroid games. Why did I buy this? Like they definitely will have to strike a different balance. And I say that knowing, I'm sure you agree, for people like you and me who are longtime fans, we don't mind. I don't care if it's full of logs to read. I'm going to read them because I think it's a great way to tell the story. But
when I was a kid, playing Metroid Prime, like, because, you know, especially back then, like, games weren't as well accepted. My parents let me play video games, but of course they also put limits and things of that nature. But I would be like, hey, look, I might as well be reading a book here. Look at all these scans. Look at all these fancy words. Yeah. Like, this is improving my reading comprehension. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually...
It's funny because it also reminds me how much younger you are, because you would have been a kid when Metroid Prime came out, huh?
Yeah. So I'm 29 now. Prime... I mean,
it was 2002.
I was 11
so you would
when it came out.
Yeah. Gotcha.
10 or 11.
I was 22. I was living at an apartment with two of my roommates. So to me, I was like, I don't mind reading as much. But when you're a kid, for sure, like totally, I get what you're saying. You're like, this reading is crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't want to lose that. I want that lore to be there, and it's something that you kind of choose to do, right? Like you don't have to force yourself to do all that, but if you want that extra information, that extra background, it's there.
Yeah. And I am excited to see what they do with that, because I think they have to change how they deliver the narrative in this game, but I also think it needs to be I think it will be so much more narrative focused than the first three that they can't possibly inundate you with logs to the same degree. I think honestly, there's a good chance the story is just going to be more important. Like, you can miss it in the first three games. I don't think that's going to be the case with Prime 4. So they're going to have to do something more than just read all these scans. Even if there's some reading, I think there'll be some more movies and cutscenes. I think there's going to be voice acting. And, you know, we talked earlier, people might cry foul on that. But I think they're going to execute it all much better. So,
yeah. Quick question. How are you on time here? How much time we got? Like,
I mean, I kind of should wrap. I feel bad saying it, but I know I've got food to go eat because our time zone different. It's like,
yeah. So we'll wrap. No, it's fine. I've been trying to maintain the 2 to 2.5 hour window lately, so this is fine. So we'll just do a couple questions and then we'll close out here. Let's see here. Nintendo Josh, what are your guys' thoughts on online multiplayer in Metroid Prime 4? Only if the single player is incredible, then I think they should put a multiplayer in my opinion. Rob, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that if they put the right time and resources into that campaign, and the campaign is a perfect 10, then they can go crazy with online multiplayer. And even if it's bad, I don't think any of us are going to really care because the campaign is good. But I will say, you know, quickly, my one point on that is, I used to think that they wouldn't do it and they shouldn't do it, but I have since changed my mind on both. I think they should do it, and I think that they will do it. I think it's coming in Metroid Prime 4.
It kind of goes back to what we were sort of talking about earlier, how Prime 4 has a lot riding on it, because not only could it mean consistent Metroid, so Nintendo will have another epic adventure game like Super Mario and Zelda happen consistently, but it also can mean the revival of Retro Studios as a developer that can come out with games consistently as well. We've seen them continually hire. They've expanded their headquarters. Their studios. Like, if they can get to the point, like, because if they succeed with this, Retro Studios is going to get a lot more funding, get a lot more money, and they'll expand even more, and we could see more games come out from them consistently, not waiting every once a decade for a game, but perhaps every 2 years or so. Like, that would be amazing, and I think it's possible. So there's a lot riding on this. So one way to make sure Prime 4 is successful is get in a multiplayer, because that makes it automatically more mainstream. However, it goes back to what you said. It has to have an incredible single player, because that is a priority. Rob, both of you and I both think that this is more of something like, it's like Space Zelda, kinda, right? Obviously there's differences, but you understand my point. Like, it's more about that adventure, that single player experience. That's what's important. So if you take away from that, not good. But if you can add to that, very good. So I think that's what they got to do. Can they do it? I mean, I believe Nintendo's funding is definitely making sure Retro Studios has what it takes to do this. So I'm optimistic that may be the case, but we'll see.
Same. Yeah, same here.
Yeah, I have a super chat here from B Leaf. Thank you very much, B Leaf 789. Love the live streams. Keep it up, dude. Hashtag Metroid. Thank you very much. Yeah. Hashtag Metroid. Metroid. Maybe this is the year of Metroid, guys. I think
this is the year.
It's gonna be. Fingers crossed. So I got another question here. Bradley Sprinkle. It's for you, Rob. Rob, I have a question for you. What are your thoughts and theories about who Silex is under the stolen armor, and what is his role? What his role will be in Prime 4? We kind of talked about it a little bit, but do you have an idea of who it might be?
I kind of don't really subscribe to this theory that the identity of Silex is meant to be a big mystery. And a lot of people do. There's been a lot of talk. Obviously, a very popular discussion is that he's Samus's long-lost brother, And nothing is impossible, as I like to say. Nothing is impossible. I'm not personally expecting really a big reveal for who Silex is, so I can't say that I have too many theories other than just a rogue competitive bounty hunter, the way he was kind of introduced alongside of all the other hunters in Prime Hunters on the DS.
Yeah.
Where it was really just, what's an excuse for a bunch of other characters to fight Samus? Let's just have a bunch of different weird alien bounty hunters. Some were alien, some were not. Let's just do that. And so, yes, they might have this reveal of Silex being somebody, but I'm kind of just personally looking at it as he sees Samus as competition. He's another hunter that exists out there in the universe, in the galaxy, and they're aware of each other. And maybe the story context could be he's always been trying to get back at Samus or one-up Samus finally. And so I think we just might see that as his role. And then, of course, like we talked about earlier, the role being the what's the word? Like the secondary boss, like not the final boss, but the guy who. I think that's his role. So
Yeah. Well, I also feel like Ridley's probably going to be in the game too. So, and I don't think Ridley's necessarily going to be the final. I mean, I wouldn't mind. Ridley could be the final boss of the game. I think they would have to elevate him a little bit, but that's not out of the question. But I also feel like there's definitely going to be a Metroid. Personally, I think, especially with Sonic stealing a Metroid, and given that the series is called Metroid, it's going to be heavily tied to the story. I would like to see another Metroid Prime. But,
Same.
We'll see. In terms of answering the question, though, just my opinion, I think I said a little bit more with other people that there is something behind his character, but at the same time, I'm not also committed to the idea that it's his long lost brother. It may be someone we don't really know yet, right? And throughout the context of Prime 4, they sort of explained that, because we do know that Silex has some sort of animosity or magnetism towards Samus for some reason. And we may have there may be no context yet that explains that, but I do feel like there's definitely going to be something to it. I do think there's a connection between them. They may not have explained what that is yet, but I do think there's something.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and to me, it's all on the table for sure. I lean towards thinking there's not a big reveal coming, but they sure could do it, and I'm open to it. Like, I say bring it on,
Yeah.
I'd like to see some of the other hunters even show up, So, we'll see.
And I mean, if there's multiplayer, maybe that's one way they can go about doing it.
Yeah, actually, that's
make it more of a hero shooter and not just like Samus versus Samus.
Yeah, no more Chibi Federation Force little people.
Yeah,
no more of that.
There's a lot of options, but we'll save a multiplayer discussion for another day. Because that would take another 2 hours.
Yes, it would.
Let's see here. There's quite a few questions, but Rob, I know we gotta keep things to a close. But guys, if you have more
quick fire, if you want a quick fire, just like super fast. I mean, I'm having fun, but I do have to go at the same time. Yeah. Or is it not? Are they not quick fire questions? They might not be quick fire questions.
Oh, here's another one for Bradley Sprinkle. What classic villains do you guys want to see in Metroid Prime 4 besides Ridley and Dark Samus? Personally, I'd like to see Kraid and/or Phantoon. Definitely want to see Kraid. I would like to see another Queen Metroid, actually, in conjunction with the Metroid Prime.
Yeah. So Phantoon is a tough one. And I'll admit I'm rusty on my lore here, but Phantoon isn't really introduced till much later. And I believe that Phantoon is a surprise to Samus when she fights Phantoon. So I don't know if it makes sense for Phantoon to show up in Prime 4 without breaking the canon, the loose canon that is kind of the Metroid thread. But obviously Kraid becomes just the most obvious and exciting one. I would like to see Kraid come back, or not come back, maybe be introduced to her for the first time, because
doesn't Kraid have some armor on him when you see him in Super Metroid? But you actually see him in the original Metroid too, right? Like, I guess my point is, I think there's room for them to there's a way for them to introduce it without it necessarily ruining the lore of Metroid.
100%. Yeah, and that's again because these games and theoretically Prime 4 take place before both Metroid 2 and Super Metroid, so it's not unfeasible for her to have interacted with and even fought Kraid before she ends up fighting and defeating him in Super Metroid. Like that's totally possible. But it's tough because when you ask the question about returning villains, because the Prime games take place so much earlier in the timeline, you're not really getting returning villains. You'd have to change the order of events of when Samus met most of the villains.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm saying? So that's why it's like that's why Phantoon is like, it's hard to do that because Phantoon would be new if she ran into it at this time.
Well,
it's same with Kraid or same with him. Yeah.
Sure. One thing I'll point out though is if we look at Ridley, Samus fights
in the first one.
Yeah, but Ridley is also been completely trashed throughout Metroid Prime. Multiple times we see him. He has the armor. He gets wrecked in Prime 1. Then he has the extra armor, and you just destroy his obliterate his chest.
Darth Vader.
Yeah,
he just becomes Darth Vader basically. Yeah.
But we know in future Metroid games he still comes back, and he's not quite that mechanical version. But there is actually a mechanical version too. But that's I think that's set in Zero Mission.
They basically play a little bit fast and loose with it, if we're being honest.
He's like Bowser and Ganondorf.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, there is a discussion to be had about Mother Brain. That's a character that could make a lot of sense. Obviously, Samus can't defeat and kill Mother Brain, but that could be an entity or a plot thread that goes throughout Metroid Prime 4. So that's again returning in terms of the audience, but it wouldn't be returning for Samus. Samus wouldn't be like, "Oh my God, you're back," So. So we can do one more probably before I bounce out of here.
Well, all right. So, Elian Maris, this is a Zelda question. When do you both think Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 will release? I'll let you go.
I mean, yeah, I definitely think at the end of this year. I think it's the holiday title this year, for sure.
I'm inclined to agree. I also think that the Zelda remaster, or I think we're gonna get Skyward Sword HD. Maybe not in the first half, but the first 2/3 of this year, and then holiday is Breath of the Wild 2, and I think we save the other Zelda stuff for Beyond.
It's interesting because we all think about the every year Zelda game, and of course this year has the 35th anniversary. So would they take up 2 Zelda releases in the same year, and lose potential release for 2022? It's tough to say. They do a collection this year and Breath of the Wild 2 in the same year. Well, what do they have for next year?
Yeah.
So who knows? But I do think I think it's possible. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Actually, there's one I didn't want to throw at you, because we know Monolith Soft has several different studios, and we know that they've been working on something beyond Xenoblade. And if you look at some of the concept art, that actually has Zelda symbols in it. What if they're working on a Zelda spin-off? Yeah, no, I would have to look it up. I'll send it to you. Well, how long will it take? It'll probably take too long.
You can pull it up. You can pull it up.
Monolith Soft.
I'll pull it up here. But I mean, that's interesting because we know Monolith has been working on something that isn't or some new game, like you said. And there's been talks and conversations about Zelda, and wasn't there something? Maybe you know this. I can't. Wasn't there something to the effect that Monolith helped with make the open world in Breath of the Wild? Am I crazy? Was that something?
Nope, they did that. Yep.
They did, right? Yeah.
Yep,
so that means that there is kind of a loose connection there with Monolith and Zelda. So I would love to learn that they're doing something in the Zelda world, All
right, so this is kind of hard to make out, and with the stream and the compression, it may be very hard to see, but I'm going to post it on screen for you guys. So let me see if it lets me zoom in more. Enhance! So
Enhance.
This is official concept art from... if you look carefully, you can actually see, and this might not be the best imagery of it, but if you look carefully here, you can actually see like Triforces and what looks to be like the Hylian text. And maybe it's not, it just looks really similar.
This is the Uber video game fan kind of analysis here is what this is. It's like, is that little thing what we think it is? But it does look like it.
I mean, I feel like when you get really close, it looks really... And again, it's concept art. It may not be that, but it looks. That's a Triforce, but of course, Triforce is just a basic symbol, so it may not really be anything.
Who knows? Tough call.
But maybe, right? Point is though that I'm just suggesting to you the idea that it doesn't just always have to be mainline 3D Zelda and 2D Zelda or remasters. Eventually, they're gonna run out of remasters. What are they gonna do? Zelda spin-offs. We just had a great one last year with Age of Calamity. Why can't they do more? Imagine what Monolith Soft could do. What if they did like sort of like a Dark Souls MMO sort of style Zelda game?
That could be really cool. I also think that there's a possibility of Four Swords returning. I would like to see them do that.
Yeah, that's a whole other. Yep, that's a whole other style of Zelda that would be fun to see. Not saying we'd like to see Link's crossbow training, but maybe there's something there.
That's so funny because I've been playing GoldenEye on the Wii the past 2 days.
Yeah.
And it's just this morning I turned it on again a little bit, and it opened. I noticed this. It opened with the thing, because the Wii games always open with the menu of put on your wrist strap, and they showed a picture of someone slamming their TV like, don't be this guy. And there's one. For GoldenEye, it had the whatever the gun thing was that you would put the Wii remote in the front and kind of do this sort of thing, right? And I saw that and it just gave me flashbacks. I was like, oh my god, you remember when we had all these different contraptions for Wii remotes for all the different games? And so many. And Link's crossbow training was famous for having the one where you're just like, and I was like, I just gave me PTSD. I was like, oh my god, all these accessories from a bygone age.
And what's funny is that with the Switch now and Labo, like they can do more accessories. I mean, for example, there's been speculation about Metroid VR. Like, what if they have a Metroid Prime VR patch with Labo, or what if, like, for example, one of these revisions is like a straight up like new Switch, but it's more like a side thing, like a Labo like not Labo expansion, but like a VR expansion to Switch. Kind of like how like PlayStation had a VR system as well, like so investing more hardware into that.
Yeah, you'd have to update the hardware for sure. I don't think the Switch can handle truly good VR the way we would want it for something like a Metroid. But yeah, I don't know that I need too many accessories though. Like for me, even like Ring Fit Adventure coming out, it's like I don't want all that stuff. I never even got the Wii balance board, but I did have some of the gun things, and I was like, I don't miss this personally.
Yeah, I like that the Switch is just very clean. You have the two Joy-Cons. It attaches. I rarely even take my Joy-Cons off. It's very rare. If I'm playing portable mode, I play portable mode. If not, put in a dock, use my Pro Controller. It's very simple. It's very clean. I don't have cords and wires and little plastic pieces all over the place. I like it like that.
It's so nice. It's so much more organized.
Yeah. absolutely. Let me see here. This is a question for Birdman, but it's quick. Didn't the remake of Metroid and 3DS hint at something? It kind of did. At the end of Samus Returns, there was like, well, first you fight Ridley, which is not in the original, and then there's also like, there's like the X-Parasite.
Well, there is, but are they talking about Zero Mission or Samus Returns? I guess I took it as Zero Mission because they did add a new thing at the end of Zero Mission.
Well, on the 3DS.
Oh, okay.
Because Zero Mission was on the Game Boy Advance, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
I actually haven't played through Zero Mission. I probably should do that. But
that's a great game.
Yeah,
that's a great game.
So I believe that it was maybe teasing something which could relate to the next 2D Metroid game, which we've already talked about, perhaps related to Fusion in some way, be it a sequel, a remake, something like that. Yep.
That was the implication at the end with the little bouncing Metroid thing and this SAX gene. So the whole thing was planting seeds for Fusion at the end of Samus Returns.
All right, Rob, I got one more question for you, and then I'm gonna let you go. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So this is a me question. Okay. So recently it dawned upon me. And this is where I sort of tie everything together because if you look at the thumbnail, it's Bowser's Fury, it's Zelda, and Metroid. So we've noted in the past that Nintendo sort of lined up both not Metroid, but Mario and Zelda, right? If we look at Bowser's Fury, perhaps it gives us some insight in terms of what they're working on in the future. And we see Bowser Jr. kind of as like a bit of a companion character. Do you think perhaps that Zelda could be a companion character and perhaps there's some communication between the Mario and Zelda team in terms of like that sort of companion character technology, and maybe the Bowser's Fury thing is just, you know, the team's using that technology to sort of explore around in an open world environment?
You know, I do kind of think that's possible. That's that's an interesting idea. And so I guess, I mean, to just straight up answer the question, yeah, I think it's possible. I think ever since the trailer for Breath of the Wild 2 was released, everyone said it feels like Zelda is a bigger focus this time. We don't have confirmation, but just the vibe of that trailer and seeing Zelda as the first character, it just feels like they're trying to tell us she will play a bigger role in this game than she has before. You know, even so far as people thinking you can just play as her throughout the entire game. So your idea, you know, making like the Bowser Jr. comparison where it's like somebody who's following along and is just proactive as you do XYZ things. I mean, I guess I could kind of see that. And Zelda already has a penchant for having some kind of companion character, right? They've never been that practical and that, you know, AI driven. They've never really interacted with the world much. They're just saying things and giving story stuff. But I think that I could see that being an evolution of a gameplay system where it's like you play as Link, but Zelda is always with you, and she has, you know,
powers
the base
or abilities.
Level AI program, AI programming and powers and abilities to do things as you run around the world, and maybe you can tell her to do stuff or whatever. So I don't know that I would put like a hard bet that they're going to do it, but I definitely think it's in the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I'm not convinced either, but it's like, it kind of makes sense, because like to your point, the whole navi thing, that it's like an easy way to put a navigator. Maybe also offer it as an option for co-op, same way Mario does. I don't love the idea of putting co-op in Zelda, but you know, maybe it can work.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that if you just look at the lore for Breath of the Wild, Zelda kind of loses her powers, not necessarily forever, but you kind of leave that up for debate there. But perhaps like some level of progression you have throughout Breath of the Wild 2 is that Zelda sort of reawakens her powers, which gives you more options together, like you do combinations. Link's the warrior, Zelda's more of the scholar, but maybe she also becomes more of a mage, right? To sort of back you up. And maybe her scholarly abilities...
Age of Calamity kind of shows that. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but Age of Calamity kind of shows us the way she fights in that game, right?
Yeah. Using her knowledge, her and wherewithal of the runes, but then also when she obtains her power, she's literally using spells, right? So could be some really cool combination mechanics that they could do there. There are some, I mean, look at God of War, what they do with the son and Kratos. Like, there could be some mechanics they do with that. So maybe there's a possibility there, you know? Another thing, just to bring up, because Zelda's a scholar, maybe she has like she's a sort of a scan mechanic, right? Where you can get some sort of lore information from the world because she's the one that's a researcher.
She would reveal things, maybe
like
she can
does in the trailer where she puts the torch to the wall and she's like, yo, there's something going on here.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, maybe.
And that's how I tie a neat bow on us all connecting, because scanning Metroid.
Nice.
There you go.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's a cool idea. I mean, I was considering the whole playing as Zelda throughout the whole game, and I was like, yeah, maybe not. I had been convincing myself of a possibility where maybe there are going to be sections where you just play as Zelda for whatever reason. Maybe you just go back and forth, and they're just different. They're in different places, and you have to jump around or something. But you bring up the God of War comparison, and I feel like, that's an extremely complex system they made for God of War, and a lot of it was based around a very heavy cinematic narrative. And since we don't think Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 will be that, I think they could get away with a much simpler form, like you said at the beginning, more like what we seem to see Bowser Jr. doing, and I think they could get away with something really cool there, and it could be awesome. So
it would be a unique gameplay possibility, which is something that we know Nintendo will be very excited about. I you know what? I'll say this, and there's probably not really a way to prove it, but I am almost 100% convinced Nintendo's at least thought about it as an idea. Not saying they're going to do it, that they've been doing it, but they considered it as a gameplay concept that they might try out.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it didn't sound crazy when you said it, because it feels like a Nintendo kind of development or an evolution. It feels like something, even in a Zelda game, it feels like something they would consider. So I agree with you. I could see it making people mad, though. That's the one thing that works against it. I think a lot of people might push back on it. Whether it's fair or not, I just, we know people, we know audiences and how people react. I could see people being like, oh, you got this dumb Zelda, two people I got to control at the same time. That's not what I want. Link is supposed to be this, and this shouldn't have to, So they might have to tread careful ground if they're going that direction. But I like it, and I'm open to it.
Sure, and it also comes down to execution, too, on how they do it and how invasive it is to your gameplay. Like, there's a lot of facets, hard to say how they actually handle it. Maybe she's not even involved with the story at all, but I really don't want her to be the damsel in distress again. I would be disappointed if they make her that. Like, maybe there could be moments where that happens, but overall, I want her to be active in the story. I don't want her to just be, oh man, Ganondorf stole her, and he flew up into space with a castle. I gotta find a way to get to space now. Like, watch that be the plot. I feel like,
yeah, that'd be so funny. Well, somebody said Zelda in space on something I read, like in, I think it was in the comment to my last video, actually. Someone was like, what if the castle goes into space and it's Zelda in space? And I was like, that's dumb, but I also kind of want to see what that would be like. So yeah, maybe
it would be. It could be really cool, but also like that's not what I came for, right?
No, it's not.
And actually, sure I made a joke on Twitter earlier today. I literally said, "Oh, what we might sort of talk about Zelda being in space and Metroid being in mountains, like,
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So you
never know.
It's not out of the question.
Wasn't there? And I know we're trying to end this. I actually need to go eat food. I'm dying here. But wasn't there? Yeah, I'm close to the end. Wasn't there, like, I want to say 10, maybe more years ago, like concept art or something official that got out that they were considering and designing like a steampunk Zelda? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, there was.
Sure that happened.
I don't, but it wasn't like the Zelda team that was working on it. I want to say maybe Retro Studios was like working on, like, I mean, I want to say it was them.
I think that idea sounds actually not terrible. I mean, I don't know if I'm alone, but I am totally open to that. That's
let me throw another idea at you. We were talking about spin-offs earlier, right? Like I think it's such a grand departure that I'm not sure I would want the main Zelda team to do it. But if you could have someone like Monolith Soft or Retro Studios someday do something like that, so we could still get like that idea, I'd be down for that. I'm down for cool things like that. And maybe, even the main Zelda team, they could do it. It would just be such a grandiose departure. But to the point of whoever initially theorized Space Zelda, if you're gonna do something crazy like that, probably better to do it in a sequel than the next like main story arc of Zelda. So who knows, maybe this is in space.
Zelda in space.
I would almost prefer more like maybe the teleport, like if there is like a teleportation, like maybe to the Twilight, to like the Twilight people or something.
That would be. I'd love to see the Twilight Realm basically just come back in some way. Yeah, totally. I'd like to see the Twilight Realm. I'd like to see the Great Sea. Someone also in my comments brought up the idea of maybe Hyrule Castle and some other sections of the Hyrule map break off and float into the sky. And what if you can go to different places in the sky, like in Skyward Sword? I thought that was a really cool idea.
So I don't know if you've heard me talk about this, but since Breath of the Wild was a thing, I've been wanting for there to be Loft Wings. In Breath of the Wild 2, they got to expand upon what you can already do. What's one way to expand upon the open air concept, straight up flying, but have islands in the sky? That's one way to expand the map, right? It's already within the lore. Maybe some of those islands have always been there, but thanks to perhaps finding Loft Wings, because he repelled the calamity, so Loft Wings are now back in Hyrule. You find a couple, and they're still really rare. More of a late game find, because if you can fly, it kind of breaks some mechanics. Not breaks, but you know what I mean. Like, it takes away from some of the platforming.
I hear you.
But just to have it in the game and be able to fly around, that would just be epic.
It would be amazing, and especially if you could take off. And did you play Starlink on the?
Yes, I did.
Did you play that game?
Yeah, I did.
So think of how you can, from the surface of the planet, you can just take off into the atmosphere and back and forth. I actually didn't really find that game to be all that fun, but I didn't finish that mechanic.
Yeah,
me neither. It was whatever. But I think they nailed that part of the game.
Yep.
And what if you can be just running on Hyrule, and then you can like whistle for your Loft Wing, and it comes and you just swoop and grab it, and then you're flying. And what if there's just floating islands and you can just go straight up to them? Because in Skyward Sword, it was like a loading screen between. They could make it seamless on the Switch, so you could just go there. That is awesome.
So with you, especially considering the strong possibility that Skyward Sword HD remaster might be around the corner. Thinking about how there's this history of Nintendo using the remaster to sort of hint at what's to come. Yeah. Skyward Sword, there was that boundary. Maybe they revisit that, like, let's do away with that boundary. Breath of the Wild 2.
I think it's not crazy, man, because I pointed it out in my video this past week. I mean, if you watch that end of that Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, the castle is lifting. It's not just like it is lifting.
It is. I think it straight up is rising. I've gone back a few times, like gone like frame by frame. It is going up. Yeah. It's not just shaking. It is going up.
Something's happening.
Now, is it going to go all the way up? Is it going to become like the castle in Ocarina of Time? Is it going to fly into space? We don't know. Is it going to teleport? Like, there's a lot of different things that could happen, but it's definitely at least rising in that trailer for that couple seconds. Yeah.
And that's a big deal. That was the final thing they showed us. And it's why I've got my theory about going somewhere else, because I feel like it's meant to show you in the sequel something about the place you're in will change. We don't know how much, but I think it's meant to show you things are going to get different. So I'm just so excited for the possibility.
And that we already sort of talked about it, right? But just throw this out there, and then we're actually ending. But imagine that earthquake, right? Castle rising to the sky. It puts you into the sky. There's more areas in the sky. Perhaps some parts even go as far as being like space-like, right? But still mostly sky stuff to allude to Skyloft and things of that nature. But then you still go back to the ground. That's still a big part of the game. That world is there. You still have rebuilt towns. But because of the earthquakes and all of these, the seismic activity, what happens is that a lot of the temples and dungeons that we do not see in Breath of the Wild are unearthed. Especially considering that Breath of the Wild, if you look at the map for Breath of the Wild, it has everything but those temples and dungeons. Where are they? They're underground because it's been so long. So those are unearthed. They play a role in the story. We already see that Link and Zelda are exploring underground. But on top of that, because of the seismic activity, water breaks in. So some parts are flooded, some parts are destroyed, some parts are just big brand new towns or have more creatures and stuff because of repelled calamity. And you have the sky and maybe some Twilight, Dark World stuff or like space stuff. Like, there's so much they could do without, they don't have to technically leave, but they can still expand so much and make it so different.
Dude, it's just so, we're making the perfect game basically right here on this podcast. We're making the perfect Zelda game.
Take notes.
So I hope Nintendo's taking notes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just, when I think about the idea, I imagine a version of this game where there's like, I don't know, let's say 5 or 7 fairly sizable floating islands that have like lifted out of Hyrule and they're floating, and they're big enough, they could be the size of just like a city, right? So there could be like town and a forest and even like a waterfall. It's like a big thing. And like I imagine, just like in Skyward Sword, where you could walk to the edge of one of those and you could look down and see through a haze of clouds just the Hyrule map below you. And because in Skyward Sword, you just look down and you saw it was just white clouds, right? Because it's an older game, and so that's fine. It was cool at the time. But what they could do with it now, being able to see from way up high,
maximize the open air concept.
Come on, man!
And actually be able to go down.
Chills.
Actually be able to go down.
You just go.
So you can go way higher in Breath of the Wild 2, but you also can go way lower too, because there's a lot of underground elements.
Yeah, and just
instead of building build up and down.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. Build up. Don't build out, build up. It's perfect. And people would love it. They'd love it. I
think it'd be amazing, for sure. Which was maybe, and if you think about it design-wise, it's probably really complicated, which would take them 4 years to do.
Yeah, that's true. Hopefully it's the kind of thing the Switch could handle, too. And they probably could do it. I feel like they could do it.
I mean, if they were able to do Breath of the Wild, I think they can do everything else. And that was actually for the Wii U, right? Like the Switch has better CPU and stuff, and also
very true.
Even with same hardware, as time progresses, they just get better techniques and more efficient. So, 4 years into the future, better hardware. I'm optimistic. Yeah.
Me too. I am too.
Well, is there anything else you want to bring up, Rob, before we call it a night?
No, I mean we covered everything. We covered Mario, Zelda, and Metroid really extensively, like
the three big ones.
The big three.
Yeah,
for Nintendo. So this was great. I think I'm spent personally.
Sweet. No, I think we. Yeah, I'm with you. I think we covered a lot, and I'm gonna stop starving you. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, guys, please subscribe to this man. He's hungry. But
subscribe to me because I am hungry.
Yeah, but also because he makes a lot of really good gaming content, especially with Metroid and Nintendo. His channel's linked in the description below.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Of course. But yeah, guys, if you have any questions or anything, or just put them in the comments below, leave a like, share, stay tuned. Things are coming.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Take care. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Cool.